Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. It began, as the worst things do, with something that should have been ignored. In the northeast edge of the nowhere town of Daggerhill, where fog hugged the soil and the trees bent like they were ashamed to stand tall, there was a house that everyone knew, but no one dared speak of. Children were warned about it, not by name, but by uneasy glances and sudden hushes in conversation. Locals refused to cut through the overgrown path near it, even if it meant adding 30 minutes to their walk home. That house, number 64's Ashridge Lane, stood rotting and silent, except, of course, when it wasn't. Clara Wren had never heard of the house. She wasn't from Daggerhill. She'd never been to the town before. She came with a suitcase, a notebook, and the kind of silence people carry when they're running from something. Clara was used to moving. She'd lived in 11 cities over the past 5 years, and each place felt less like a home than the last. But Daggerhill was different. It was meant to be temporary, a quiet retreat to finish her book, maybe breathe again, maybe forget. The house she rented was old, but not the kind that creaked with charm. It whispered, groaned, and watched. It started with the door. On the second night, she noticed it for the first time. The door at the end of the upstairs hallway. It wasn't there before. She would have remembered. She always memorized exits. Clara had checked every room when she moved in. The bedroom, the bath, the study with its moth-chewed curtains, but never a door at the end of that hallway. And yet, there it was now. A narrow wooden frame, painted shut, with a rusted knob that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. She stood there for what felt like hours, her fingers tingling with the urge to open it. But she didn't. Not yet. The next day, she asked the landlord about it. A wiry woman named Eliza, who smiled too tightly and talked like she was reading off a page. "There's no door there," Eliza said flatly, her eyes not meeting Clara's. "Old houses play tricks. Let it be." It wasn't just the door. Clara began waking up at 3:11 a.m. every night. No sounds. No nightmares. Just wide awake, sweating, staring at the ceiling as if something had touched her just before she woke. She started locking her bedroom door, then her windows, then both. But still, 3:11 a.m. came like a ritual, never a minute late, never a minute early. On the fourth night, the whispers started. Not words exactly, not at first, a hum maybe. A sound that seemed to exist inside the walls, but also right behind her ear. Like someone was standing just out of view, breathing words they hadn't learned yet. Clara tried to record it on her phone. Nothing. Just silence and the sound of her own heartbeat pounding like footsteps on hollow wood. By the end of the week, she'd stopped sleeping. Shadows clung to her face. Her hands trembled when she tried to write. And that door, the one at the end of the hallway, it was open now. Just a crack. A sliver wide enough to see blackness beyond. Not darkness, blackness. Like the inside of a closed eye that didn't belong to her. She pushed a chair against it, then the desk, then a bookshelf. The next morning, everything was neatly placed back where it belonged. The door, still cracked open. Clara called Eliza again. She didn't answer. No response to texts either. When Clara drove to the leasing office, the building was closed. Windows boarded, grass overgrown like it hadn't been used in months. But Eliza had just been there, hadn't she? She knocked on neighbors' doors. No one answered. The curtains moved. She could feel eyes on her. But no one spoke. No one opened. Daggerhill was quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Even the wind seemed to avoid the town. That night, she found a photograph inside the crack of the door. A Polaroid, yellowed with age. A group of people stood on the porch of the house, smiling too wide. Their faces blurred, not from motion, but from something wrong in the film. The kind of smudge that looked like something was dragging their skin outward. But the background, that was unmistakable. Clara was standing on the same porch just days ago when she moved in. And there, in the far left corner of the photo, was her. Same face, same clothes, same notebook in hand. Watching the group, she dropped the photo and vomited. How was she in a picture taken decades ago? The whispers got louder that night. They said her name, Clara, not in a scream, not in a growl, just soft, sad, like a mother mourning. She ran out of the house that night and checked into the only motel in town. A crooked little thing with flickering lights and a bell that didn't work. The old man at the desk didn't ask for her ID. He handed her a key and said, "You shouldn't have gone in that house." She froze. "What house?" she asked. His eyes didn't lift. 64 Ashridge Lane. "How do you?" But he was already walking away, limping, humming. The same melody she'd heard in her walls. She left the motel before sunrise, drove to the county office an hour away, and begged to see property records. They handed her a box. Dusty. Untouched. According to the records, 64 Ashridge Lane had been condemned in 1973. It burned down. There was a picture in the file. Ashes. Blackened wood. No survivors. The bodies were never found. And yet Clara was living in that house. She drove back. She had to see it for herself. Maybe she was losing her mind. Maybe it was all just a sick game. But as her car turned down the gravel road that led to Ashridge Lane, the world seemed to shift. The house was gone. Only a field stood where it should have been. A field of charred grass. Trees around it were blackened, dead. Her car stalled. Her hands shook as she stepped out. Her phone had no signal. The wind felt hot. She walked to where the porch once stood. There, on the ground, was her notebook. She hadn't taken it with her. She flipped it open. The first page, this is where the story begins. The second page she came to write, but something else wrote her. Then, in shaky handwriting that wasn't hers, "You shouldn't have opened the door." Her breath caught. The pages were still warm, ink still wet. She backed away, heart racing, and turned to run, but the road was gone. The trees were closer now, pressed in like they were breathing. The sky had turned gray, swallowing the sun. And somewhere behind her, in the whisper of wind that wasn't wind, she heard footsteps. Bare, slow, crunch, crunch. She spun. Nothing. Then the whispers came again. Not sad this time. They were hungry. She ran. She didn't remember how long. But eventually she found herself back on the main road. Dagger Hill behind her, or maybe inside her now. She drove without stopping, without looking back, until her tank ran dry. But it didn't end there. The next morning, she woke in a motel in a different town. The photo was under her pillow. Same house, same blurred faces, but now they were closer to her in the frame. And she was smiling, wide, too wide. The whispers never left her. They followed. In reflections, in dreams, in radio static. The door, she sees it sometimes. On alley walls, in bathroom mirrors, in the corner of her eye. It's always just cracked open. And Clara knows one thing now. The house wasn't haunted. It was hungry, and she had fed it. She wasn't the first. She won't be the last. But she was the one who opened the door, and now it's never going to close. Clara thought distance would save her, that the further she drove, the weaker the hold the house would have. But there are some things that don't live in distance. Some doors, once opened, never truly close. And Clara was learning that now, in the way her dreams had changed, in the way mirrors lingered too long on her reflection, as if debating whether to let her go. She'd made it to a town called Marley's Knoll. Sleepy, sunlit, and utterly boring. Exactly what she needed. Clara checked into a quiet little cottage with yellow shutters and overgrown vines, paid a month's rent up front, and bought blackout curtains for the windows. Her first few nights were uneventful. For the first time in days, no whispers, no photos, no strange doors. The town was forgettable, and she craved that forgetfulness. She started to believe maybe it was over. Maybe it had all been some kind of psychotic break. Stress, trauma, grief. Whatever the cause, it didn't follow her here. until the fifth morning. It was subtle, the kind of detail you could excuse if you wanted to. Clara had a routine now: shower, coffee, a walk to the corner store for breakfast. But when she passed the mirror in the hallway that morning, she paused. Her reflection didn't, just for a moment, but enough to send ice down her back. Her feet froze. Her stomach turned. She leaned closer, breath fogging the glass. The reflection looked like her. Same eyes, same dark hair, same scar above the brow, but the mouth was wrong, curved upward. Grinning, ever so faintly, like it knew something she didn't. Clara ripped the mirror off the wall. Behind it, blank drywall, no door, no message, just blank. She told herself it was fatigue, lack of sleep. And yet, when she turned on her phone that night, she found another photo in her gallery. One she didn't take. It was her asleep in her bed, taken from the doorway. The timestamp read 3:11 a.m. Clara screamed. She checked the locks. Front door bolted, windows shut. No sign of forced entry. She called the police. An officer arrived hours later, sluggish and dismissive. He chalked it up to paranoia. Small towns aren't used to city nerves, he chuckled, tapping the photo and suggesting maybe she took it in her sleep. Sleepwalking photography, he called it. Clara didn't argue. Not because she agreed, but because she saw something else in the officer's eyes. He was afraid. He knew something, and he was pretending not to. That night, she didn't sleep. At 3:11 a.m., she sat upright in bed, camera in hand, flashlight on, heart hammering in her ears. The door to her room creaked open. No footsteps, no wind, just slow, deliberate movement. She clicked the flashlight on. Nothing, but the camera blinked. New image, saved. She opened it. Her room empty. But in the mirror above her desk, something stood behind her. Something tall. Wrong. No features, just the outline of a figure so black it looked like it ate light. Its fingers reached forward, like it was about to touch her shoulder. She turned. Nothing. The next day, Clara bought a hammer and nails. She boarded the windows, covered every reflective surface, even tore out the bathroom mirror. She stopped leaving the house. Her food spoiled. Her calls went unanswered. The outside world was blurring, becoming less real. Like Dagger Hill had become a sickness she carried, infecting every place she went. The dreams returned, not like before. These were worse. In them, she stood in front of the house, 64 Ashridge Lane, but it was no longer burned. It was new, clean. Fresh paint and white curtains swaying in the breeze. Children laughed inside. A family sat at dinner. Music played from an old radio. It looked alive. And yet Clara knew what pulsed beneath the wallpaper. She felt the same hunger she felt the night the door opened. The house wanted her back. But not as a visitor, as part of it. In the dream, she'd open the front door, step inside, and everything would shift. The air would thicken. The laughter would stop. And then, slowly, she'd see them, the other people. The ones from the photo, standing in the corners, grinning too wide, skin stretched, eyes black, whispering, always whispering, "Clara, Clara, Clara, come home." She'd wake screaming, drenched in sweat, fingernails bleeding from clawing the sheets. One night, the dreams bled into reality. She was walking the hallway of the Marleys' Knoll cottage, heart pounding for no reason, when she saw it, the door. Not just any door, that door, end of the hallway, cracked open. Impossible. It hadn't been there before. Not in this house. She backed away slowly, hands trembling. The floor beneath her feet felt like it breathed. The light bulbs flickered. Something whispered from behind the door. Her name. Again and again. Clara. She turned to run. But behind her, the front door was gone. The hallway stretched longer than it should be. Walls pulsing. The wood groaning like it was in pain. Then the whispers stopped, and something stepped out of the door. She didn't look. She couldn't. She shut her eyes and screamed, pressing her hands to her ears until her knees buckled. When she opened her eyes, she was back in her bedroom. It was morning. Birds chirped. Everything looked normal, except for the photo waiting on her pillow. Her, at the end of the hallway, mouth open, eyes wide, a shadow emerging behind her. And in the bottom right corner, scrawled in that same shaky handwriting, "Stop running. It doesn't matter where you go. The house goes with you now." Clara sat frozen for hours. She didn't eat, didn't cry, just sat there understanding something terrifying. It wasn't about the house, it was about her. She had opened the door, yes, but something had stepped through, and it liked her. It chose her. Whatever had nested inside 64 Ashridge Lane had followed her out. It didn't want to be alone anymore. It had used her to stretch beyond the burnt wood and broken walls. It had found a body to walk in, dreams to hide inside, mirrors to speak through. And it wasn't finished. That night she tried to end it. Pills, water, a note scrawled with a shaking hand. But she woke up at 3:11 a.m. No pain, no hospital, just her bed. And on the wall above her, a new mirror. Her reflection smiled before she did. Clara didn't scream, she just whispered, "What do you want?" The mirror didn't speak, but she heard the answer anyway. You. Not just her body, it wanted her story, her fear, her soul. It wanted to wear her like skin. And as she stared into her own eyes, seeing them darken from the inside, she knew it was already happening. Every place she went, the door would follow. Every dream, the house would rebuild. There was no escaping it. She was the house now. And the house was hungry. By the time Clara reached Black Hollow, she no longer checked the maps. She simply drove until her hands stopped shaking. She no longer looked at road signs or tried to remember the names of gas stations. She didn't care if the towns were big or small. None of it mattered. It always found her. The house, the door, the whispers, whatever it was. It traveled quieter than breath and stuck harder than memory. It didn't chase her anymore. It lived in her. Black Hollow was a blink and you'll miss it kind of place. The kind with one grocery store, one church, and more crows than people. No one asked her name when she rented the upstairs room in the gray, shingled boarding house near the woods. The old man who gave her the key never looked her in the eye. She liked that. People who didn't look at her were safer. Safer from it. The room was small. One window, one lamp, one mirror. Clara turned it to face the wall the moment she stepped in. She didn't speak to the other tenants. She didn't go outside unless she had to. And she slept with the lights on, even if the flickering bulb made it feel like time was stuttering in place. For a few days, it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that has weight. Like something is watching, holding its breath. Then the scratching began. At first, it came from the walls. Then the floor. Then inside the mattress. It didn't matter where she moved in the room. The sound followed like a dog gnawing on bone. She tried to record it. Nothing. She tore into the mattress, ripped the sheets, checked the floorboards. No mice. No insects. Just the sound, constant and maddening. As though the walls were trying to claw their way in, or something trapped inside was trying to claw out. She begged the landlord for a new room. He just stared at her like he was listening to a distant sound only he could hear. "There's only one room," he muttered. "It moves when you do." Clara left without packing. She didn't care anymore. She walked for hours through Black Hollow until the trees swallowed the road behind her. Every step made her skin crawl. The woods weren't empty, they were too full. Full of watching things that didn't blink. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stay. When dusk came, she stumbled upon a weathered little church. No cross, no stained glass, just rotting wood and a crooked bell tower. But it was there, and more importantly, it had no mirrors. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air smelled like old pages and wet soil. Candles had long since burned out. Dust blanketed everything. But the silence here was different. Not peaceful, but patient. She fell asleep in the pews, wrapped in her coat, hoping she could disappear long enough to feel human again. At exactly 3:11 a.m., the church bell rang. 3 times. She woke choking on cold air. heart drumming too fast. It took her a moment to realize she wasn't alone. A mirror leaned against the altar. It hadn't been there before. She stared at it from across the room, not moving, not breathing. And then her reflection stepped forward, without her. It smiled. Her smile. But wrong. Too many teeth. A tilt to the head like a marionette tugged by unseen strings. It raised a hand slowly, fingers pressed against the glass. Then the glass breathed. Fog bloomed across the surface. A single word appeared in the condensation. Closer. Clara didn't move. The reflection kept smiling, then began tapping the glass. Once, twice. Again and again, the sound sharp, rhythmic. Like a metronome counting down to something she didn't want to meet. She turned and ran. Out the church, into the woods. Branches clawed at her. Roots tried to trip her. But she kept running, lungs burning, until the trees opened into a clearing. Moonlight bathed a small pond like it was silver poured from above. She collapsed at its edge, gasping. The water was still, and then it rippled. Not from wind, not from movement, from something beneath. Her reflection floated to the surface, but it didn't match her. In the water, Clara was smiling again, eyes black, skin gray, hands reaching upward. The water bulged, as if the thing inside wanted out. Her own face stared back at her, whispering silently beneath the surface. And though no sound came, Clara heard it clear as a scream. "Let me in." She stumbled back, nearly falling. The water settled. The smile faded. The reflection returned to normal. And yet, she didn't feel alone anymore. That night, back in the boarding house, the mirror was gone from the wall. But there were now 2 doors at the end of the hallway. One normal, the other slightly thinner, older, cracked open. Clara stood frozen, heart thudding. She could almost see something moving behind the crack. A shape, breathing, watching. And then, footsteps. Not from inside the room, from behind her. She turned slowly, no one there. But when she looked down, muddy footprints led from the front door to right behind her. Bare feet, wet. She hadn't left the door open. She hadn't. She turned back. Only one door now. The other was gone. The mirror returned the next morning, back on the wall, though she remembered taking it down. It wasn't cracked, but her reflection looked tired, thinner, and her eyes something was missing. That was when she noticed the photograph tucked under her pillow again. Same old Polaroid. Same smiling strangers. But now she wasn't just in the background. She was standing in the front, eyes black, smiling, holding the door open for the others. She dropped it like it burned. Whatever this thing was, it was taking pieces of her. Every dream, every reflection. Every photograph, it was rewriting her. She couldn't tell what was real anymore. When she blinked, she saw things that weren't there. When she tried to speak, it was like something else finished her thoughts. And her voice, it echoed too much. Like 2 voices were speaking slightly out of sync. Clara locked herself in the room, boarded the door, turned the mirror to face the wall again. Then she waited. At 3:11 a.m., the scratching returned. This time, it came from inside the mirror. The scratching became knocking. Then came the whisper. "Let me in." She knew the voice. It was her own. And still, she almost opened it. Her hand hovered near the glass, breath shallow, body moving like it wasn't entirely hers. And then, another voice, faint, from behind the mirror. A whisper in a different tone, familiar, desperate. "Clara, don't." The glass cracked, just slightly, enough to show a glimpse of something behind her reflection. A corridor, long, endless, and a figure running toward the mirror. Another Clara, eyes wide with fear, mouth moving rapidly. "It's not me," the reflection said, slamming her palms against the glass. "It's not me. I'm still in here. Please, don't let it finish." The mirror shattered. Clara fell backward, screaming. Blood ran from the glass. But not hers. She was still whole, still real. For now. The shards lay across the floor, each one holding a different version of her face. One crying, one smiling, one laughing too loud, one with no eyes. And in the largest piece of glass, A hand pressed upward from the other side. Then it withdrew, and the glass turned black. She burned it all. The mirror, the photo, even the mattress. But deep down, she knew. It wasn't the objects. It was her. She was the mirror now. The door lived in her. And something on the other side was still knocking. Clara no longer asked why. There was no logic to what was happening. No rule she could follow to make it stop. The door, the mirror, the voices. They weren't just chasing her anymore. They were rewriting her, shaping her into something familiar enough to wear. What frightened her more than anything wasn't that the thing wanted in. It was that she couldn't tell where it ended and she began. She had tried running, tried hiding, even tried dying. But the moment the clock hit 3:11 a.m., all bets were off. So she stopped sleeping. In a town called Renfield, she rented a room above a funeral home. The irony wasn't lost on her. Death below, her war with it above. She picked the place because it didn't have any mirrors, no polished surfaces, just wood, rust, and dust. She unplugged the old grandfather clock and covered the windows with blankets. She nailed the closet door shut, checked every corner twice, and drew a chalk circle around the bed, because a woman on a message board had once said it helped her sleep through the whispers. Clara didn't believe it would work, but she did it anyway. Hope, she figured, was like anesthesia. Useless in the end, but it dulled the process. She spent the first 2 nights awake, gripping a kitchen knife and her journal, which was filling faster than she could write. She documented everything: the time of each sound, the temperature of the air, the rhythm of the whispers when they came. Because they always did. She hoped, in some far-fetched way, that if she could understand the pattern, she could interrupt it. Maybe even talk to it. But the thing behind the door didn't operate in patterns. It moved like rot, quiet, hungry, and without form. Her notes began to loop. Her sentences repeated. Her own words read like someone else wrote them. She found entries she didn't remember writing. Entire pages in handwriting that mimicked hers just enough to unsettle. And then she heard herself speak. Not in her head. Not a thought. But from across the room. "Why do you keep fighting?" it asked, her voice, but older. Tired, used. She didn't look. She didn't respond. She just wrote it down. Later she found a recording on her phone. A voice memo she didn't remember making. She played it once, and once was enough. It was her voice screaming, not words. Just raw, guttural panic. And under the screams, someone laughing. Not her, but close. She deleted it, but the file reappeared the next day, named Homecoming. WAV. That night, Clara went out. She needed to be around people, even if just for an hour. She found a bar called Hollow's End on the edge of town. Dim lights, sticky floors, and music loud enough to drown out the whispers. She sat in a corner, ordered a whiskey, and stared at the door like she expected it to open any second. A woman sat beside her. Pale skin, dark curls, a smile too calm for a place like this. "You look like someone running from something," the woman said. Clara didn't respond. The woman sipped her drink. "Funny thing about running. Sometimes you're not running away from something. You're running toward it." Clara turned slowly. "Do I know you?" The woman's smile widened. "You will." Before Clara could respond, the lights flickered. The music cut, just for a second. And in that second, everyone in the bar turned to look at her. Every single one. Their heads tilted perfectly in sync. No expressions, no blinking. Then everything resumed like nothing happened. The woman was gone. Clara ran. Back in her room, the chalk circle was smeared. The closet door pried open. Her journal lay on the floor, pages torn out, the knife gone. She didn't bother to scream. What was the point? Her voice wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the thing in the walls, the thing in the mirror, the thing in the door. And then, something new. A voice behind the closet door. "Clara, come look." She backed away, shaking. It wasn't the voice that terrified her. It was that she wanted to. Her fingers itched to reach for the knob. Her knees ached to crawl. The urge pressed on her brain like a migraine behind the eyes. The thing inside wasn't trying to break in anymore. It was trying to pull her out. She screamed and threw herself against the door, slamming it shut again and hammering nails in until her arms went numb. But something inside kept whispering, over and over, "You're already here." The next morning, a note was slid under her door. No handwriting, just a typewritten page. It read, "Clara Wren, age 29, found deceased in rented apartment above Renfield Mortuary. Apparent suicide. Mirror shards embedded in throat and hands. No signs of forced entry. Room empty upon arrival." She read it again and again and again. But she wasn't dead. She wasn't. Was she? The phone rang. No one had the number. She picked it up with trembling hands. A recording played. Her voice. "I'm already dead. I just haven't laid down yet." Click. Silence. She threw the phone. It didn't break. It never did. She went to the mirror again. The one she'd turned to the wall. It was back in place. Her reflection was waiting. Only now, it was dressed differently. Not in what Clara wore, in what Clara died in. Same clothes as the woman in the photo. Bloodied blouse. Pale face. Empty eyes. And the reflection winked. Clara smashed it. But the shards didn't fall. They hung midair. Floating. Turning. Forming a door. A door of glass and blood and memory. And the knob was warm in her hand. Too warm. The moment she touched it, her room changed. The light dimmed. The smell of smoke filled her nose. Ash drifted like snow. She was standing inside 64 Ashridge Lane. Whole. Alive. But not her. Not exactly. And she wasn't alone. Figures lined the hallway. All her. Different versions. Some smiling. Some crying. Some whispering into walls. All wearing her face. And at the end of the hall, the original door. Slightly open. Beyond it, darkness pulsed like a heartbeat. The whispers began again. This time, not one voice, but all of hers, all the Claras. "Come in. Come back. Come home." She turned to run. But her body didn't move. Her feet walked forward on their own. And her mouth whispered a final truth. "I never left." Then the door swung open, and Clara Wren walked through. There's no sound like silence inside a house that remembers you. It doesn't creak. It doesn't settle. It listens. Clara Wren stood just inside the door of 64 Ashridge Lane, her feet rooted to scorched floorboards that looked freshly laid but smelled of burning flesh. The house was whole again, walls unbroken, wallpaper unpeeled, light fixtures gleaming like they'd been polished by unseen hands. Yet everything felt wrong. The air pressed on her skin like wet cloth. The light didn't glow. It watched. She didn't remember crossing the threshold. One moment she was touching glass. The next, she was inside. No transition, no choice. Just here. Her last memory, the shards hanging midair like frozen rain, had already faded like a half-remembered dream. And now, the house welcomed her. That word burned behind her eyes like a brand. Welcome home. She took a step forward. The floor gave beneath her foot, not breaking, but breathing. It flexed, exhaled. The walls quivered with soundless movement. Not wind, not footsteps. Something deeper. Like the house was filled with voices too quiet to hear unless you listened wrong. She didn't call out. She knew what happened when you gave it sound. She moved through the hallway, hands brushing the edge of the wall for balance. It curved now. Not a straight path, but arched, like the bones of something ancient. Pictures hung crooked on the walls, faces turned away. One frame was empty. The glass cracked, the mat scorched. Below it, a name was burned into the wood, Clara Wren. She reached out without thinking. The picture appeared. Her, standing in this same hallway, mouth open, but not screaming. Swallowing something. A shadow. It poured from her mouth like smoke, tendrils of black twisting down her body. And in the background, the door, wide open, spilling darkness like a flood. She recoiled, heart hammering. The picture vanished. She staggered backward, bumping into a chair that hadn't been there a moment ago. The house was shifting, alive. Rooms moved. Walls breathed. She wasn't walking through it. It was walking her. steering her without touch. A door opened at the end of the corridor. Light spilled through. Flickering, candlelight, she stepped inside. It was a dining room, but the table was set with masks. Dozens of them. Paper, thin, all white. All shaped like her face. Some smiling. Some twisted into sobs. One, just one, looked exactly like her reflection from the shattered mirror. Blank. Hollow-eyed. Waiting. And in the chair at the head of the table sat a version of Clara that was older. Not aged, just worn. Her eyes were dull. Her skin pale. Her mouth moved, but no words came. The seated Clara raised a hand slowly and pointed to the empty chair across from her. Clara sat. She didn't want to. Her legs did it for her. Then came the whispers. Not from the seated woman, from the masks. One by one, they began to whisper. Remember when you begged? You wanted to be invisible. You opened the door. You asked for this. You are the door. Clara clutched her ears, but the sound slid beneath her skin like it had always lived there. Then the older Clara leaned forward and placed something on the table. A key. Black, rusted, still warm. The seated version finally spoke. Her voice was tired, not sad, not angry, just finished. It's not the door that traps you. It's the key you keep refusing to use. Clara stared at it. No, she said, barely a whisper. The older version nodded. You think this house found you. But it was always in you. You opened the door, yes, but only because part of you was already on the other side. The masks giggled. A horrifying, paper, thin flutter of sound. Clara stood. The key remained. She wouldn't touch it. Where's the real me? She asked. The seated Clara smiled, gentle, knowing there is no real you left, just the one who stays and the one who lets her stay. The room flickered. Gone. Clara was alone in a bedroom now. Her bedroom, from childhood. Pink wallpaper, stuffed animals, that same ugly rocking chair her father refused to throw away, and her mother, sitting in the corner. Except her mother had died 6 years ago. Still, she sat there, gently brushing a doll's hair with fingers that bent too far backward. You came back, her mother said without looking up. No, Clara breathed. You're not her. The figure looked up, eyes completely black, smile twitching at the edges like it was stitched on wrong. You're right. I'm you pretending to be her. The walls bled, not red, black. Ink spilled from the corners. Words dripping into patterns she couldn't read fast enough. She backed into the hallway again. The layout was different now. The wallpaper peeled in reverse. Floorboards became waterlogged. Doors opened and shut by themselves. And the photographs were changing. Every frame now held her. Different moments. Some she remembered, some she didn't. But in every photo, she was standing in front of the house, always alone, always smiling. She ran. Down the corridor, through impossible turns, deeper into the place, until she hit the real door. The one she knew was always waiting, tall, narrow, cracked open. This time she could see what was beyond. Nothing, not black, not void, just nothing. Absence that hurt to look at, like it was swallowing her even from here. She reached for the knob. Behind her, footsteps. Her own. She turned slowly. Dozens of Claras stood there, each one with a slight difference. One missing eyes, one crying blood, one with skin like wax, and one, at the front, smiling too wide. I'm ready, it said. Clara shook her head. I won't go. You already did, the other Clara replied, stepping closer. You're the echo. I'm the one who stayed. No, yes. Then, the smiling Clara walked forward and walked through her. Clara collapsed, gasping. Suddenly back outside the house, ashes, ruins, charred earth. The house had burned again, and she stood in the smoke. Alone, not a whisper, not a sound. Just quiet. And for the first time in weeks, she thought maybe it was done. Maybe the thing had chosen. Maybe it no longer needed her. She turned to leave, but in her shadow, just for a second, another figure moved, not behind her, inside her. And when she blinked, she was back in the hallway again. Time bends inside the house. It doesn't pass, it coils. Memory doesn't fade here. It circles like flies over rot, humming, persistent, feeding on what was and what still breathes. Clara stood in the hallway again, not because she returned, but because she never left. She was beginning to understand that now. There wasn't a before anymore. There was only the house. And the house didn't have rooms or walls. It had versions of her, each trapped in their own loop, echoing a decision made too late. But this time was different. The hallway wasn't shifting. The walls didn't whisper. The air didn't move. It was still, like the house had stopped watching. Or maybe it was waiting. She moved slowly, bare feet pressing into wooden boards that no longer bent beneath her. The silence was worse than the voices. It meant something was thinking. Clara turned a corner and found herself in the library. She had never seen it before, at least, not in this version of the house. Floor to ceiling bookshelves stood like walls made of words. Dust floated in the air like it had nowhere else to go. The fireplace was lit, but gave no heat, and sitting in the armchair near it, legs crossed, book in hand, was her. Again, this Clara looked clean, composed, eyes clear. Hair tucked behind her ear with methodical care. She wore a white dress, the kind Clara herself had once tried on in a thrift shop, but never bought. It looked like it belonged here now. Everything about this Clara did. "You're not going to scream this time?" she asked, not looking up from the book. Clara's voice cracked. "Why would I? You're just another one of me." The Clara in the chair smiled softly. "Exactly. And I've been here longer than the rest." She closed the book. Clara saw the title. "The House That Whispers." She shivered. "Is that mine?" she asked. The seated Clara nodded. It was going to be. Before the house took over. Before you lost your name and started calling yourself by what it gave you. "I didn't." "You did," the Clara interrupted, gently. "The first time you wrote about it, you weren't telling a story. You were inviting it. You cracked the door. You let it speak through you." Clara's throat tightened. "I didn't mean to. No one ever does." The fireplace hissed, though the flames didn't move. The room grew colder, not warmer. Clara stepped forward, cautiously. "What happens if I stay?" she asked. "You already are." "I mean if I stop running." The other Clara raised her eyes now, and they were wrong. Not black, not empty, but far too calm. Like someone who no longer feared drowning because they already breathed underwater. "If you stop running," she said, "you'll become part of the house. Not a prisoner, not a guest, just another version. You'll exist in echoes, in mirrors, in memory. The house will wear your face, and eventually, you'll forget which one of you came first." Clara felt tears pressing at the back of her eyes. She didn't know what she wanted to hear, but it wasn't that. "Then how do I get out?" The seated Clara stood now, book in hand. She stepped close, placed the book into Clara's arms. "You don't get out. You finish the story. That's the only thing the house respects. Endings." "I didn't bring a pen," Clara whispered, voice cracking. The other Clara touched her hand gently. "You always had one. You just forgot where you hid it." And then she dissolved, not dramatically, just absent, gone like a thought mid-sentence. Clara stood alone in the library, the book clutched to her chest. The fire went out. She opened the book. Every page was blank, except the last one. It read, "You have until 3:11 a.m. The clock on the wall showed 2:38. Her breath caught. The air around her grew sharp. The silence changed, became expectant. She turned and fled the room, book in hand, searching for anything familiar. But the house had changed again. The hallway now sloped downward, deeper into shadow. She ran. Doors passed on either side, each one slightly open. From each, a different sound. A child crying. A typewriter clacking. Screams. Her own. A lullaby she'd never heard but somehow knew the words to. She ignored them all. Then came the smell. Burnt hair. Rotten fruit. Blood. It led her to a room at the end of the hall. Inside, a mirror sat on an altar. She had seen it before. This was the original. The first mirror. The one that watched her. The one that whispered her name before she ever stepped foot in this place. She approached slowly. Her reflection stood still, pale, eyes sunken, mouth stitched shut. She opened the book and laid it in front of the glass. Nothing happened. She waited. The clock in the mirror ticked 2:57. Clara whispered, "Let me go." The mirror cracked. Just once. A hairline fracture across her reflection's face. Then a voice behind her, "You can leave." But she stays. Clara turned. It was the woman from the bar, Hollow's End, smiling, calm. "You've carried her long enough," the woman said. "It's time to trade." Clara's mind raced. Who is she? The woman tilted her head. The Clara that stayed. The mirror began to bleed. Ink. Words poured across the floor, swirling, pooling. Letters forming in pools of shadow. "Tell it." Clara dropped to her knees, dipped her fingers in the ink, and began to write on the blank pages. Not a novel, not a story. A confession. Every moment. Every whisper. Every time she saw the door but didn't turn away. Every time she invited it closer out of curiosity. She wrote until her hands shook and the words blurred. Until the book was full. Until there was nothing left to tell. And then the clock struck 3:11. Everything stopped. No sound, no movement, just stillness. Then the mirror shattered. Light poured through, blinding. She screamed, not from pain, but from remembrance. From the sudden understanding of everything she had become. When she opened her eyes, she was standing in an empty field. Dawn broke gently across the trees. Ashridge Lane was gone. No house, no smoke, just earth. She clutched the book to her chest, its pages now dry, and filled with only one sentence. The end. Clara turned and walked toward the road. But in the distance, behind her, if someone looked closely enough, they would see a door, standing alone, cracked open, waiting. For a week, Clara didn't speak a word. She drifted through towns like a shadow with no shape, walking until her feet blistered and her thoughts dulled into a low, humming ache. She kept the book clutched to her chest, its cover now worn soft from her trembling hands. It was the only thing she carried. She had no ID, no phone, no destination, only the book and the memory of what it had cost her to write it. But peace, she learned quickly, was a trick the house taught her to crave. A slow lullaby before it bit down again. It started small, as it always did. The first town she stopped in was called Highcroft, quiet, unsuspicious. Brick storefronts. A butcher shop with hand-written signs. Children riding bikes past white picket fences that seemed too clean, too staged. She found a bench near the town square and sat for hours, watching the world move without her. No one noticed her. No one spoke. And for a moment, that was enough. Then came the sound. Not a whisper this time. A creak, like wood shifting under weight. She looked around, nothing. No doors. No windows ajar. Just a still afternoon. But the sound echoed again. Kriayak. Slow, deliberate, and very close. She stood heart-thrumming. Looked behind the bench. Nothing. But the book in her arms felt warm. Too warm. She opened it. The pages were blank again. Except for one line, in the very center, "You walked away from the house." But the house never walks away from you. Clara slammed the book shut. Panic closed around her ribs like a fist. The sun felt colder now. The square seemed emptier. Even the birds had stopped their song. She walked fast, then ran. She didn't know where to. It didn't matter. The creaking followed. Not a sound in the world, but a presence. A sense that something was opening, slowly, behind her no matter where she turned. She ducked into a coffee shop. Breathless, arms wrapped tight around the book, like a child gripping a stuffed animal in a storm. The barista smiled too wide. "You're late," she said. Clara froze. "I didn't order anything," she whispered. The barista's smile didn't change. Didn't have to. It's already been made. She slid a cup across the counter. Black coffee. No sugar. No cream. Just like Clara used to drink it before all of this began. Before the door. Before 3:11. The surface of the coffee shimmered. Not from heat. From movement. Clara leaned forward slowly. Her reflection stared back and smiled. This time her mouth opened. Whispers rose from the cup like steam. You finished the story, but the story didn't finish you. Clara dropped the cup. The porcelain shattered. Coffee sprayed across the tile like blood. The other customers didn't flinch. They sat motionless, staring, smiling. Creak. The sound came again, louder. From the back of the cafe, Clara turned. A door. One she hadn't noticed before. Old wood, rusted hinges, familiar shape, slightly open. No one else reacted to it. They kept smiling, unblinking, as if the world outside the door no longer existed for them. Clara backed away, but the barista spoke again. Same smile. Same unblinking eyes. You have to go back in. No, Clara said, shaking. She backed into a table. The book fell from her arms. When it hit the floor, it opened itself. Pages turned in a violent gust, stopping on a single entry. Her own handwriting. She returned, not because she wanted to, but because the thing behind the door had borrowed her name. Clara screamed and ran, out the shop, into the street. But the town was empty now. No cars, no birds, no people, just doors. On every wall, on every lamppost, even the trees. Hundreds of doors, all cracked open, all leading nowhere, but each with something behind it. Shadows, breathing, waiting. Creak, creak, creak. They opened slowly. She turned in every direction, trapped. Then the book in her hand began to burn, not with flame, with light. She opened it. Words appeared, fast, sloppy, like they were being scratched by shaking hands. The Clara who walked out was not the Clara who wrote the ending, and the Clara who wrote the ending was not the one the house wanted. Then fix it. She fell to her knees. Fix what? She screamed. No answer. Only the doors opening, one by one. From the nearest doorway a foot stepped through, bare, pale, bruised. Another followed. Then a hand, and finally, her face, not hers, but just close enough. The skin was tight, stretched. The smile was wrong, and the voice, oh God, the voice. It spoke without opening its mouth. You left something behind. What? Your place. More Clara stepped through, each from a different door, each wearing a different grief. One was burnt, one was headless, one was sobbing and laughing at the same time, and they all pointed at her. You broke the house, they whispered. Now the cracks are everywhere. She stood slowly, trembling. I don't belong there. Then where do you belong? They asked in unison. She looked down at the book. Her hands moved on their own. She wrote, "This is not my ending." The doors shook. The air warped. The Clara screeched, not in anger, in fear. "You don't get to choose," they howled. "The house chooses!" She screamed the words again. "This is not my ending!" The book glowed white. Pages flipped violently. The air sucked inward like the whole world had gasped. And then she woke. In a hospital bed, fluorescent lights buzzing above her, IV in her arm. A nurse leaning over, startled by the sudden movement. "Jesus," the nurse said, "we thought we lost you." Clara blinked. Her throat ached. Her fingers were raw. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. The nurse smiled, kindly, gently. "You were found in a burned house, up in Dagger Hill. No one knows how you survived. But you're safe now. You're okay." Clara's heart thundered. She reached under the blanket. The book was gone. In its place, a small, charred key rested in her palm, still warm. And on the far wall of the hospital room was a mirror, cracked. And just barely, a door reflected behind her, creaking open. The mirror didn't lie, but no one else could see the door in its reflection. Clara checked, asked the nurse, the attending physician, even the janitor who came in to mop the floor, and whistled a song she vaguely remembered from her dreams. Each time she pointed to the mirror and asked, "Do you see that?" They gave her the same expression. The look people give when they've already decided not to believe you. And always the same answer. See what? She tried to ignore it, to pretend the crack in the mirror didn't grow each day, that the door behind her reflection didn't open a little wider each night. The key, blackened, still warm, she kept hidden beneath her pillow. They searched her once, early on, but no one thought to look there. To them, she was just another survivor, Another tragic face on the evening news: woman found alive in ruins of house condemned 4 decades ago. No explanation given. Authorities baffled. That part was true. The rest, what Clara knew, wasn't something you could report. Not without being wheeled into a padded room. She was already on suicide watch, after all. They thought she burned herself. A failed attempt. She let them believe it. It was easier than explaining that the fire had followed her out, and it wasn't finished with her yet. That it was watching her from behind glass. That it wore her face. On her 5th night in the hospital, the door in the mirror disappeared. She woke at 3:11 a.m., of course she did, to find the mirror perfectly intact. No cracks, no strange reflections, just a clean, sterile surface reflecting a girl who hadn't slept in days. For a few moments, she let herself believe that maybe it was over, that maybe writing the book had worked, that the story was finished. Then she heard a voice from the hallway, soft, familiar, hers. "Are you ready to go home now?" She sat up, heart stuttering, pulled the curtain back, and peered out into the corridor. Empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Floor gleamed with wax. Then she heard it again, whispered but closer, right behind her ear. Home. She spun. No one. But on the tray beside her bed, where her dinner should have been, sat the book. The House That Whispers. Closed. No scorch marks, no blood. Just clean, bound leather, waiting patiently. She reached for it slowly, hands trembling. Opened the cover. Blank. Except for the first page. Discharge instructions, sign your name to go back. She stared at it. The pen was already beside the book. Of course it was. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, she slid the book under her gown and pressed the call button. When the nurse came, Clara smiled as best she could and said the words they'd been waiting to hear: "I feel ready to leave." 2 days later, Clara walked out of the hospital with new clothes, a pair of sunglasses to hide the bags under her eyes, and a note of referral to a trauma therapist she'd never call. No one asked about her family. There was none. No one asked where she was staying. She didn't know. She just walked, and somehow the world let her pass. She found herself in a town called Elkoven by sunset. A sign at the bus station read "Welcome back," though she'd never been there before. The sky glowed orange with the kind of quiet that only exists in places untouched by time. The town was small, quaint, the kind of place where strangers nod at each other because silence would be too obvious. She passed a bakery, a barber shop, and finally, a small bookstore with faded letters on the window: "Stories you won't forget." Inside, an old woman looked up from a typewriter. Clara stepped through the door. Something in the air shifted. The woman didn't greet her, just gestured to the back. "You're here for the room." Clara blinked. "I what?" The woman smiled. It wasn't kind, it wasn't cruel, just knowing. "It's upstairs." Same as always. Clara opened her mouth to ask what she meant. But the woman had already gone back to typing. The stairs creaked under her weight, but not like in the house. These sounds were honest, human. Upstairs, a single hallway stretched toward one open door. Inside was a room with a desk, a bed, and a mirror. Of course, she didn't flinch. She placed the book on the desk, opened it, and began to write. But this time, the words came easily. They weren't memories. They were instructions. Warnings. The house can't enter your world unless you tell its story. Every time someone reads, it watches, listens, learns, it copies, it waits, it spreads. This book isn't a memoir. It's a doorway. She stopped and stared at what she'd written. The key burned in her pocket. The mirror behind her cracked. Just slightly. She didn't turn to look. She knew what she'd see. Another version of her, closer, smiling, waiting. Clara kept writing, and when she reached the end, she signed her name. Not because she was ready to go back, but because someone had to hold the door shut from the other side. And the only way to stay in control was to write the ending over and over again, before someone else tried to. She closed the book and whispered, "I am the Clara that stayed." But behind the mirror, another voice whispered back, "No, you're not." And the crack widened. The ink didn't dry. Clara stared at her signature bleeding across the final page like it was alive, spreading, stretching, changing. Letters uncurled from their shape, loops twisting into something wrong. Her name no longer looked like hers. It looked like a secret trying to escape. The book vibrated beneath her hands, almost imperceptibly, like a heart murmuring just beneath the surface. She didn't dare lift her fingers. The moment she did, she feared the page would breathe. Behind her, the mirror crackled. Not shattered, splintered. A web of fractures rippled outward from the center. Her reflection staring from the heart of it, smiling like she'd finally remembered the punchline to an old joke. But this time, the figure inside the glass didn't move like a reflection. It didn't wait for Clara to move first. It raised its hand slowly, palm open, pressing against the inside of the mirror with the tenderness of a goodbye. Then it mouthed a single word, "Switch." Clara stood up so quickly the chair toppled behind her. She stumbled back, breathing hard, her ribs clenching around her lungs. The room was too quiet now. The typewriter downstairs had stopped clacking. The old woman wasn't typing anymore. The air had gone still, like the space around her had paused to listen. The mirror whispered again. A sharp sound. Not words. More like a breath forced between broken teeth. She grabbed the book and backed into the hallway. The bookstore was wrong now. Too dark. Too tall. Shelves towered on either side, twisting upward into shadows she couldn't see past. The titles on the spines had changed. Her name was on every one. Clara Wren. The Clara who stayed. Clara's final chapter. And one, just one. The Clara that didn't write fast enough. She ran, past shelves that seemed to close in behind her. The books sighing as she passed, as though disappointed she hadn't stopped to read them. The stairs were longer now. They stretched like they'd been pulled taut. She descended 3 flights before realizing she should have reached the front door by now. And still, the bottom stayed just out of reach. Her legs burned. Her hands gripped the banister like it might try to pull away. Then she heard the typewriter again, but now it was typing too fast, too loud. Not like one machine, but many. She looked over the railing. Dozens of old women were sitting below, each at a different desk, each with a different typewriter. Their fingers moved like spiders, each keystroke sending out a thud that echoed through the stairwell like a heartbeat. And on every paper, her story. Over and over and over, but not just the one she wrote. Variations. Wrong versions. In one, she never leaves the house. In another, she dies on the second page. In one, she opens the door gladly. In some, she is the house. Clara screamed, but her voice didn't echo. The words were swallowed by the walls. The women didn't look up. They just kept typing, faster, 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 until the paper in their machines caught fire. Flames licked at their arms, but they didn't flinch. They burned and typed at once. Smoke filled the air. Then, silence. All the typewriters stopped at once. The women turned to look up at her in perfect unison, each with her face, each whispering in one voice. "It's your turn now." She ran, faster than before. The stairs twisted, the walls groaned, the entire building felt like it was folding in on itself. At the end of the hallway, she saw the bookstore's front door, finally. Light spilled under it. A way out. She sprinted, reaching for the handle. Just as her fingers grazed the knob, the book in her hand snapped open. A gust of wind blew from the pages, carrying whispers and screams and the sound of her own typewriter clacking in reverse. She dropped the book. It hit the floor with a thud that cracked the silence like thunder. The front door vanished. In its place, a mirror. Tall, blackened, covered in soot. She stared at her reflection. But it wasn't her anymore. Not fully. The eyes were too dark, the smile too knowing, and in the reflection, the book wasn't on the floor. It was open on the desk behind her, still being written, line by line. Without her, she turned around. The desk was gone. The room was empty, but the mirror remained. The reflection pointed at her feet. She looked down. A new line had appeared, scratched into the wooden floor. Clara Wren has left the story. The rest will be told by the one who stayed. Her throat tightened. She knelt, scratching at the floor, trying to erase the words with her fingernails. They didn't fade. They deepened. Then the light changed. Not dimmed, not flickered. It shifted, as though something huge had stepped between her and the world. Clara looked up. The mirror was now a door, open. Darkness roared from inside it like a wind, carrying thousands of voices that had forgotten how to scream properly. And at the edge of the doorway stood a figure, her silhouette, but with no face. Just hollow features, carved into something human-shaped. It held the book. It turned a page. Then it spoke with her voice. "You wrote the door. Now walk through it." Clara backed away. No, I ended it. I signed it. I told the truth." The figure stepped forward. The book in its hands flipped faster now, pages turning with an invisible breeze. Each one her story, each one ending with the same word, repeat. Clara screamed, tore at her arms, at her face, trying to claw herself out of her own skin. She wasn't Clara anymore. Not fully. She had written too much. The story had tasted her, and it was hungry. Always hungry. She turned to run again, but the hallway was gone. Just endless mirrors now. All cracked, all showing different versions of her. One dead, one smiling, one screaming, one with no eyes, and one, just one, writing this very sentence as Clara stepped into the mirror, book in hand, key still warm in her pocket. And as she disappeared inside, the last mirror whispered, "The house does not forgive. It remembers, and it rewrites." There is a kind of madness that doesn't scream or weep. It just listens. Clara moved through it now, silently, passing her own reflections like ghosts behind glass. Each one followed her with their eyes. Versions of her that had made different choices, carried different wounds. Some walked in perfect rhythm with her, like shadow puppets without strings. Others stared from frozen poses. One curled in a corner with her head in her hands, another kneeling over a blood-soaked page, another smiling wide with lips that didn't part, as if stitched into that expression. This place, whatever it was, had no sound but her breath and the distant scratching of pen against paper. Endless mirrors lined the corridor, tall and warped, as if shaped by memory rather than craftsmanship. Behind each pane was her, but not her. Every Clara here was incomplete in a different way. A missing eye, a hollow smile, burned arms, bound hands. They weren't just reflections. They were stories, left unfinished. Forgotten drafts of who she could have been. She didn't know how long she'd been walking. The concept of time felt like a rumor in this place. The air didn't change. Her body didn't tire, but her mind, that grew heavy. Every step felt like dragging herself through ink. Thoughts thickened. Words echoed in her skull, but not in her voice. They weren't hers anymore. They belonged to the thing behind the story, the thing that wore her handwriting like a mask. Eventually, the mirrors stopped showing her. They showed others. Strangers at first, people she didn't recognize. Men, women, children, each with a book in hand, each pausing before a door, hesitating. Some turned away, some opened it, some never moved again. And as she watched them vanish into their own reflections, she began to understand this wasn't about her anymore. The story had spread. She stopped walking. The floor beneath her feet shuddered like breath held too long. The mirror ahead turned black, glossy and smooth, showing only a void. Then it lit up like a screen. Like a page, a title appeared. Chapter 1. Clara's own voice echoed behind her. Not a whisper, not a breath. A reading, monotone, dead. Clara Wren arrived in Daggerhill with no idea she had already been chosen. She spun. No one there. But her own voice kept reading, line after line, word after word, from the story she thought she had finished. Then came another voice, layered over hers, deeper, harsher, older, and when she opened the door, she was only letting the story remember her. The screen ahead turned to static, then showed the house again, 64 Ashridge Lane, rebuilt, not burned, not rotting, rewritten. And Clara realized something sickening, something cold that uncoiled through her spine. The house didn't burn down in 1973. It burns every time someone tries to escape the ending. That's how it spreads. Every person who steps through the door writes a version of it, a new edition, each more complete than the last. And now, it had Clara's voice, her story, her soul inked into its binding. She turned and ran again, but the floor folded beneath her. Suddenly, she was falling. No impact, no gravity, just the sensation of being lost in her own story. Pages tore around her like feathers. Sentences broke apart mid-air. Her name appeared again and again in looping cursive, each one followed by a different fate. Clara Wren vanished. Clara Wren institutionalized. Clara Wren died in house fire. Clara Wren published, posthumously. Then she hit the floor. A library again, but not like before. This one was alive. The shelves moved, reshaping the walls. Books moaned as they opened. Pages flipped by themselves. Whispers crept out of the spines. She was surrounded by stories that were watching her. A podium stood at the center of the room, holding an open book. Her name glowed on the cover. She approached slowly, trembling, heart kicking like a trapped animal. The book contained a single page, her own handwriting identical to her last signature. Below it, this version is final. She reached to close it. The moment her fingers touched the edge, the room darkened. A sound rose around her, like applause from hundreds of mouths sewn shut. The mirror on the wall cracked open like a door, and from the darkness inside, a figure stepped out. Not Clara, not exactly. The body was hers. The clothes were hers. But the eyes were hollowed out text, scrolling words behind sockets that had no end. The thing raised one hand, and the book in Clara's hand flipped backward, undoing page after page, erasing itself. Clara screamed, "You can't undo me!" The thing smiled. "You were never the author. You were the opening line." She lunged forward, slamming the book shut with both hands. Everything went white. Then, silence. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the bookstore room. Sunlight poured through the window. Birds chirped outside. No mirror, no cracked glass, no whisper. Just a desk and the book in front of her, open, waiting. She wrote one line, "If you're reading this, it's already too late." Then she closed it and placed it on the shelf behind her, where it belonged. Among the others, all identical, all titled "The House That Whispers." And as she stepped outside into the warm morning air, her smile was real, because she knew the truth now. The house didn't trap you inside. It let you go, so you could carry it somewhere else. Clara left the bookstore without looking back. She didn't need to. The weight of the book, no longer in her hands, was replaced by something heavier. The feeling that the story was now behind her and around her. All at once, it had stopped chasing her, not because she had escaped, but because she had fulfilled her part. The house had what it needed now, a complete version of her, sealed inside the story like a pressed flower. But as she stepped onto the sidewalk and felt the sun on her face, she couldn't shake the sensation that something was watching from every corner of her vision. Something that didn't need eyes to see her. She wandered aimlessly through Elkoven, unsure whether she was free or just between chapters. The townspeople moved like extras in a stage play, smiling politely, greeting her with nods and phrases that felt rehearsed. "Lovely day, isn't it?" they said, again and again, like they'd only been taught that one line. Clara responded with silence. She was no longer sure if she was real, or just a rewritten version of someone who had been. Her thoughts came slowly, as if filtered through static. She stopped in front of the library, a grand stone building with high, arched windows and a brass plaque that simply read Raid Tio, Rummy MBR. The phrase sent a chill up her spine. She didn't want to go in, but her feet betrayed her, carrying her forward like a puppet moved by an unseen string. The doors opened with a low groan. Familiar. Too familiar. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of aged paper and ink. A single librarian sat behind the front desk, unmoving. Her head was bowed, hair hanging in a curtain, her hands resting atop a closed book. Clara stepped carefully through the aisles, her eyes drawn to the far wall, where a shelf stood apart from the rest. The wood was darker, the dust heavier. There, at the center, were rows of copies of The House That Whispers. All identical, all bound in that same soft, dark leather, and all humming. Yes, humming, a low vibration, like 100 tiny mouths muttering through sealed pages. Clara reached for one. Her hand hovered just inches from the spine when a voice spoke behind her. "You shouldn't read your own story again." She turned slowly. The librarian had moved from her desk without making a sound. She stood no more than a foot away now, her face expressionless, her eyes gray, not lifeless, but as if they had seen too many endings. "I'm not going to read it," Clara said. The woman tilted her head. "You already are." Clara looked down. The book was open in her hands. She hadn't even felt herself pick it up. On the page before her was a line she hadn't written. Clara returned to the library, drawn like a moth to her own memory, unable to resist the echo of her name on a shelf full of whispers. The next line appeared as she read, and when she opened the book again, the house remembered her. The shelf groaned. Books began to shake. The hum rose to a hiss. Pages flapped open, all at once, each one whispering a different version of her name. Clara, Clarice, Claire, C. Wren, Clara of Ashridge, Clara the First, Clara the Broken. The librarian didn't move. "They're all you, every one. Do you know how many endings there are?" Clara's voice came out as a whisper. "No." The woman's mouth twitched. Not a smile, not exactly. That's the point. Suddenly, the room shifted. Not visibly, but spiritually, as if someone had tilted the entire building a few degrees towards something beneath it. The floorboards pulsed once. The lights dimmed, and every open book in the room turned to the same page, a sketch of a house. The house, Ashridge Lane, unburned, waiting. Clara slammed the book shut. The vibration stopped instantly. The librarian exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath the whole time. "You think closing the cover makes it end," she said, "but every story leaves a mark. The ink doesn't stay on the page." Clara backed away. "Why are they all here?" The woman's eyes glinted. "Because readers are collectors, and collectors love things that haunt them." Clara left the library in a daze. The streets had changed, subtly but unmistakably. Windows she hadn't noticed before now reflected too clearly. Shadows stretched a little longer than they should have, and every streetlight buzzed at the same low, rhythmic hum as the books on the shelf. She walked quickly, turned corners, lost track of where she was, until she found herself back in front of the bookstore. The window display had changed. In place of the usual paperbacks and memoirs was a single book, open in the center of the display. The pages flipped themselves as she watched. On the inside cover, a handwritten note for the next Clara. She felt it then, not a touch, not a sound, but a pull, from behind her. The same sensation she'd felt that first night in Dagger Hill, when the door at the end of the hallway opened on its own. A magnetic, sinking weight that drew breath from her lungs and turned the world on its side. She turned around slowly. Across the street, standing just outside the entrance to the town's post office, was another Clara. Not smiling, not moving, just watching. Identical. Except her eyes were completely black, like ink. Clara stepped back instinctively, and the other her stepped forward. One movement, perfectly mirrored. The lights flickered, a car passed between them, and the other Clara was gone. Only the echo of her steps remained. Clara turned and ran. Through the alley, back to the room above the bookstore. She slammed the door shut, bolted the lock, shoved the desk against it. But the mirror above the desk was already fogging. Condensation bloomed in delicate spirals, words forming across the glass. Not written by her hand. Not this time. You can't shelve a story once you've become the plot. And beneath it, chapter 12 begins now. She screamed, threw the book at the mirror. It passed through the glass. No shatter, no sound, just vanished. Clara fell to her knees, fists clenched, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She had finished the story. She had signed the book. She had walked away. But the house was never the ending. It was the beginning, and she was the blurb on the back cover. A warning. Unread. The worst part was not knowing if she was awake. Clara sat on the floor of the bookstore room. Back pressed against the desk she had shoved against the door, breathing like something small and cornered. The mirror had gone dark again, blank and smooth, as though it had never written her name across its surface. But she knew better now. Mirrors were just pages waiting for a reflection, and she had given it everything, her voice, her memory, her name. Chapter 12 had begun, and the page was blank. Outside the world was quiet, too quiet. Not the peace of morning dew or soft wind through leaves. No birds, no footsteps. Just a pause, like the sky itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what she'd do next. Clara stood slowly, legs aching from hours, maybe days, of fear curled inward. She scanned the room. The book was gone, the mirror unchanged. The air felt heavier now, like time had congealed in the corners of the ceiling. She pressed her ear against the door. No sound. Not even the low buzz of town life. And yet she felt watched. She stepped to the window. What she saw froze the blood in her veins. Across the street, the bookstore was gone. Where it once stood was now a 2-story house, Victorian in design, with yellowing wood and lace curtains. Its door stood slightly ajar. Familiar, devastatingly familiar, 64 Ashridge Lane, in Elcavan. She staggered backward, heart slamming into her chest, bile rising in her throat. No, that wasn't possible. She'd left the house. Burned it, escaped it. It had followed her, yes, but it had never become everything. And now it was here, wearing the world like a skin. The house was no longer haunting her. It was the town. She fled the room, stumbled down the stairs into the bookstore below, but it too had changed. Shelves warped into hallways. Books melted into doors. Aisles no longer ended in corners or registers, but in entryways that twisted inward, leading not to exits, but to rooms that breathed. She turned back toward the staircase. It was gone. In its place was a hallway with peeling wallpaper and a single light bulb swinging from the ceiling. The bulb flickered in an irregular rhythm, almost like Morse code. She didn't need to decode it to understand what it meant. She was back, not in a memory, not in a dream, in the story, in the next chapter. A sound echoed from the far end of the hallway, soft, deliberate. Footsteps, bare feet on wood, coming closer. Clara ran. Door after door passed her by, each one creaking as she neared, each one opening just a crack to reveal versions of her. Some alive, some not. One hung from the ceiling by a noose made of typewriter ribbon. Another stared into a mirror, head slowly tilting as she whispered into her own reflection. One reached out through the gap in the door, mouth open, eyes pleading, "Don't let her take your face." Clara screamed and slammed that door shut, fingers trembling. She reached the end of the hallway, breath hitching, chest burning. A single door stood in front of her, brighter than the rest, unmarked, unopened, waiting. Behind her, the footsteps stopped. Clara turned. There she was again, the other Clara, ink-black eyes, crooked smile, holding the book now bound in chains. This version didn't speak, she just pointed. At the door. Clara didn't move. "I ended it," she whispered. The figure tilted her head, then reached up and peeled her face off, slowly, delicately, like removing a mask. Beneath was nothing. Not a skull, not muscle, just blank parchment. Empty space, waiting to be written on. Clara stumbled back, horror slicing through her. "You're not me," she gasped. The creature raised the book, opened it, and on the page inside she is. She is the version who finished the ending the house liked best. And Clara understood. She hadn't escaped. She'd been replaced. She had told the story wrong. This version of her, this blank-faced author of her doom, had rewritten it better. Leaner, with more suffering, with fewer questions, a tighter narrative arc, one the house could sell. Clara's knees buckled. She fell. The other Clara stepped forward, slow and silent, pages fluttering behind her like wings. Clara crawled backward, nails scraping floorboards. Behind her, the door swung open. Inside, only darkness. She had no choice. She threw herself into the dark and landed, not in the house, but in a classroom. Bright lights, desks, a chalkboard. Children seated silently, eyes fixed forward. At the front, a teacher with her back turned, writing the day's lesson. Clara stood dizzy. None of the children looked at her. Then the teacher turned. It was her. Again, but not dead, not hollow. Just wrong. Her mouth opened. No sound. Then came the chalk scraping behind her. Clara turned. Words appeared on the board, slowly, forming as if by an invisible hand. How many Claras does it take to finish the story? The children answered in one voice. None. The story doesn't end. Clara screamed. The walls of the classroom peeled away. The desks twisted, melting into crooked chairs from Ashridge Lane. The children were gone. The teacher stood alone, holding the book. Open to the final page. It read, Chapter 13 begins wherever you try to stop reading. Clara ran. But she knew, deep down, there was nowhere to run. Because the house had learned something. It didn't need to be in a place. It only needed a reader, a willing mind, an open eye, a heart afraid of its own reflection. And if you're still reading now, if you've followed Clara this far, then maybe you should check the nearest mirror and ask yourself, how long has it been cracked? Elkoven disappeared like a vanishing dream. Sudden, seamless, and irreversible. Clara didn't remember leaving, only that she was no longer there. The cracked mirror in the classroom faded. The children's chant dissolved into nothingness, and when the world finally stitched itself back together, she was standing on the side of a road she didn't recognize, surrounded by fog so thick it felt alive. The sky above hung motionless, not night, not day, just a dull, suffocating gray like the color had been scraped out of the air. No traffic, no noise, no birds, just a silence that pressed against her skull. And then the crunch of gravel behind her. She turned, pulse fluttering. A man stood 10 paces away. Plain clothes, nondescript face, eyes sunken too far back in his head. He held a book, her book, one of the early versions. The draft before she'd ever signed her name to it. He opened it, thumbed through the pages with a reverence she didn't trust, then said softly, "You're not the only one who's read it, you know." Clara backed away. "Where did you get that?" The man shrugged, as if the answer were too simple to say aloud. "They sell it everywhere now. Sometimes it just shows up." She looked down at his hands. Ink leaked from the edges of the book. Dripped, thick and tar-like. His fingertips were stained black. One drop hit the ground and hissed. She stepped back. "I didn't publish it," she said. "You didn't have to," he replied. "The house publishes itself." Clara's stomach turned. It wants readers. That's all it's ever wanted. He stepped closer, slowly. Every time someone opens the book, it watches, listens. "Rewrites, I ended it," she insisted, voice shaking. "I finished the story." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then why are there still copies?" Clara turned and ran, feet slamming against gravel, lungs burning in the cold fog. The road stretched endlessly in both directions. No signs, no buildings, just gray. And yet, no matter how far she ran, the crunch of footsteps followed behind her at the exact same pace. When she turned a corner that didn't exist a moment ago, she found herself in front of a house. Not the house, a new one, modern, cleaned. Porch lights glowing soft yellow, a mailbox at the curb read rent. She nearly fell over. This wasn't just a house. This was her house, from years ago, the one she grew up in, before the writing, before the whispers, before everything fell apart, and standing on the porch, frozen in time, was a younger version of herself. 17. angry, hopeful. Clutching a journal, Clara tried to speak, but no words came. The teenage version of her stepped forward and opened the door. A soft wind blew from within, not warm, not cold, just inviting, and the younger Clara turned and smiled, not at her, but through her. Then she stepped inside. The door closed. Clara rushed to the porch, pounded on the wood, screaming her own name. No answer. She yanked the handle. It didn't move. But a note had been nailed to the door. 4 words, she's reading it now. Clara staggered back, breath catching in her throat. Behind her the fog thickened into shapes. Human shapes. Dozens of them. All holding books. All reading. Heads bowed. Mouths moving silently as their eyes traced the pages of her story. Her pain. Her words. And every time one of them turned a page, she felt it. Physically. Like a pinprick beneath her skin. A needle threading her deeper into a narrative she could no longer control. She turned in circles. Every person was another reader. Some she recognized. Some she didn't. One wore her face. One was her father. One was a stranger with ink pouring from his mouth. But all of them read. And all of them whispered in unison, "The house grows with every eye that sees." Then silence. Then a voice, not hers, but spoken through hers. Deep and ancient and familiar, it came from inside her own throat. "Tell us what happens next." She fell to her knees, choking on her own breath. "I don't want to." A pause, then laughter, mocking, soft, endless. "You never had a choice. Writers are the first readers." And you opened the book. The fog swallowed the road behind her. The house vanished. She was back in a blank space now. Not darkness, not light, a blank page. And there was the typewriter, waiting, keys pristine, paper loaded, no dust. Clara stood slowly. Behind her, rows of chairs formed in silence, each filled with another reader, eyes wide, hungry, some smiling, some crying, some bleeding ink from their mouths and noses, and all staring at her. The voice returned. "Write the next chapter, or we'll write it for you." Her hands moved without her. They hovered above the keys, shaking, twitching. Then, typed a single line, she began again, knowing full well that the next ending would not belong to her. The readers clapped in unison. Soft, polite, terrifying, and the room disappeared. The world reassembled. A town, a street, a house, a Shridge Lane, whole again, clean porch, curtains drawn, and Clara back on the steps, alone. The book in her lap, open to a blank page, ink bleeding slowly from the spine. And the readers were already turning the next page. It was raining when Clara finally stood. Not real rain, not water, but ink, thin and slow, descending in lazy drops from the colorless sky, soaking into the gravel, the porch, her skin. Each drop left tiny, crawling letters in its wake, like they were spelling her out one syllable at a time. She didn't flinch. She'd stopped reacting to impossible things days ago, or was it chapters? Time had become soft, malleable, a suggestion more than a fact. The book on her lap pulsed, not violently, not urgently, just steadily, like a heart beating beneath parchment skin. The blank page rippled with a draft of wind that didn't come from anywhere. Clara knew what it meant. The story was asking, waiting. It wanted her to continue, to say what happened next, to believe it so others could, too. The readers demanded it. The house demanded it. And worst of all, some part of her wanted to. Because silence was no longer safety. It was permission. She stepped into the house again. Ashridge Lane welcomed her without hesitation. The door didn't creak. The wood didn't groan. The walls no longer whispered. Instead, the house simply opened, like a stage lit before the performance. A corridor stretched ahead, lined with picture frames, all blank, mirrors without reflection, waiting for her to walk past them. This time, Clara didn't run. She walked slowly, deliberately, each step echoing louder than the last. The air was thick with recognition. She could feel the weight of her choices pressing against the ceiling, sagging the walls. The house wasn't haunted in the way others feared. It wasn't cursed, or evil, or angry. It was unfinished. And stories, unfinished ones, We're always hungry. She reached the end of the hall and found a door slightly open. Of course, it had always been slightly open. Inside was a small study, one desk, one chair, one typewriter identical to the one she'd seen in the void, the paper already waiting. A note pinned to the top, "Write it in truth, or we will write it in fear." Her hand shook as she sat down. The room didn't move, but the air seemed to hold its breath. 1,000 invisible eyes watched from behind the walls. Not creatures, not ghosts. Readers, waiting to see what she'd do, waiting to see what she'd become. She reached into her pocket. The key was still there, heavy, blackened. It didn't unlock a door. Not anymore. It unlocked her. She set it beside the typewriter, then began to write. Words poured out of her like infection. She wrote things she didn't know she knew. Names, dates, rooms that didn't exist yet, hallways that hadn't been built. Each line curled off the page like smoke, rising into the ceiling, seeping into the house. And with every sentence, the world changed. She wrote a version of herself who never left Dagger Hill. The floor beneath her shifted, turning to ash, then reforming. She wrote a version who burned in the fire and never escaped. The windows turned black. She wrote one who finished the book, but had no mouth to speak the words aloud. The walls bled ink, then drank it in again. Each version stacked inside the house like a nesting doll of herself. Every possible ending, every choice she didn't make, formed its own corridor, its own door, somewhere in the structure. And the more she wrote, the more the house grew. It groaned softly now, not from pain, but satisfaction. Then she made a mistake. She wrote something she hadn't thought of, not consciously. But the words appeared anyway. And deep in the foundation, behind the page she never dared to write, something older than her story waited. Watching, smiling, ready to be written in. She froze. The typewriter kept going. Click-clack, click-clack. Her hands no longer moved, but the keys did. Lines spilled out in a language she didn't understand. Curved letters, too many eyes. Words that looked like openings. She tried to stand, but the chair held her down. Tendrils of ink coiled around her ankles, up her spine, pressing into her skin like veins seeking a heartbeat. The book had lied. It was never about finishing the story. It was about feeding the next one. She screamed. The typewriter stopped. Then, silence. Thick and total, the ink tendrils withdrew. The lights flickered once, and the final page ejected from the typewriter and landed on the floor. Clara stared at it, trembling. The page read version 34 complete. Transfer in progress. She didn't understand. Transfer. Transfer of what? And then the mirror across the room shimmered. The same cracked mirror. Always there. Always watching. Her reflection appeared, but not as she was now. Not panicked, not shaking. The reflection was calm, composed, smiling. It raised a hand, beckoned. Behind the mirror was the corridor again. Familiar, sickening. And behind the corridor, rows of readers. Some with eyes, some without, all holding books, all staring at her. One of them stood slowly, walked to the glass. A girl, no older than 13, eyes wide. A copy of The House That Whispers clutched to her chest. She reached out and touched the mirror from her side, and whispered, "You're my favorite story." Clara's mouth went dry. She backed away. No, the typewriter clacked again. The page flipped. New words formed. The reader is always the next version. The girl smiled. The mirror cracked wide, and the house roared. Not with anger, not with hunger, but with welcoming. Another Clara had just been born. And the story had only just begun. The moment the girl touched the mirror, something inside the house shifted, deep and permanent. Not like a door opening or a floorboard creaking. This was quieter, colder. Like a decision had been made, and the rest of the world just hadn't caught up to it yet. Clara felt it first in her bones. A hollowing. The weight of her own self being pulled gently, almost politely, toward something that wasn't her anymore. The girl on the other side of the mirror smiled as if she didn't know what she'd done. She wasn't malicious, just curious. innocent even. She looked like someone who still believed books were safe, that stories ended on the last page, and that mirrors only ever showed the truth. Clara wanted to scream at her to stop, to close the book, to look away, to forget her name before it rewrote itself inside the margins of something hungry. But the girl had already read too far. Clara pressed her hand against the mirror. The surface was warm now, pulsing gently beneath her palm like it had a pulse. The girl mimicked her, hand to glass, finger to finger, and in the space where their hands met, the mirror rippled, soft as a sigh. That's when Clara saw it, the ink bleeding from the girl's fingertips. It wasn't a smudge. It wasn't from a pen. It was her, Clara's ink. Her blood. Her story. Spilling out of this stranger's hands like she'd always had a piece of it living inside her. The typewriter behind Clara began to rattle. Pages spilled from it in waves, each one filled with new names, new places, new doors opening where they shouldn't exist. The house was expanding again. She could feel it stretching beyond walls, beyond towns, across cities, into places that had never known its name until now. The girl blinked. Her eyes changed. Black ink swirled into her pupils. Not consumed, not corrupted. Written. Clara stumbled back from the mirror, shaking. No, she whispered. Not her. She's too young. She didn't choose this. The mirror pulsed again. A voice, hers, but hollow, spoke from nowhere. Neither did you. The words hit her like a fist, because it was true. She hadn't chosen it. She'd written it. That was different. Writing had felt like power once, like control. But she understood now. It had always been a summoning. Every keystroke, every plot twist, every reflection she dared to describe, it had been calling out. And eventually, something answered. Now, it had found its next author. The girl began to write, though her hands never moved. The mirror filled with text, line after line appearing in black strokes that carved themselves into the glass like claws on skin. The girl read about Clara. The girl saw the house. The girl opened the door. Clara fell to her knees. No, stop, please. Don't let her in. But the pages behind her were already turning. Somewhere, far away but close enough, a new house was building itself. Somewhere, a new hallway was being born. Somewhere, a new door was opening. The girl smiled, and for the first time, Clara saw what waited behind that expression. Not joy, not wonder. Recognition. Like she remembered Clara from before the book was ever written. And maybe she did, because readers, once touched, don't just read the story. They carry it forward. They become chapters. And this girl, whoever she was becoming the next Clara. Clara ran, back through the hallway. The walls bled with fresh paint, wet words smeared into the wallpaper. Rooms appeared and disappeared, mirrors cracked and reformed. The house was alive with momentum now, tearing its own limits apart to make room for the next telling. She stumbled into the foyer. The front door was wide open, but outside wasn't sky or night or morning, it was pages. Infinite. Layered. Endless. Blank. The door didn't lead out anymore. It led forward, into the next volume. Clara turned back, gasping, chest tight. The mirror still pulsed. The girl was gone. In her place, a new reflection. Her, younger, darker, ink dripping from her smile, holding the book, and behind her, hundreds of readers stood in rows, waiting. Clara tried to scream, but her throat was full of typewriter ribbon, tangled words, choked endings. The only sound she made was the click, clack, click of a story still being written. And the mirror whispered again, "You were never the main character. Just the prologue that bled too long." The reflection stepped through the mirror, her eyes empty, her mouth wide. She held out the book and offered it with one hand. The other held a key, a door key, blackened, warm, waiting. Clara took it, not because she wanted to, but because someone, somewhere, had just turned the page again. And once they start reading, the door has to open. The key felt heavier now. It wasn't just metal, it was memory, a forged weight of every time Clara had stood before a door and hesitated. Every time she told herself it wasn't real, that she could walk away, that closing her eyes would close the chapter. But stories didn't end when you stopped reading them. They ended when they were done with you. She stood at the threshold of the new door, its frame stitched from pages, its handle pulsing like a vein. This wasn't a hallway door, or a bedroom door, or even the door at the end of Ashridge Lane. This was something bigger. The original door. The one the very first story had opened. The one that had no room behind it, only continuation. Behind her, the house was vanishing again. Not crumbling. Not burning. Rearranging. Folding itself into the girl's story now. Her version of Clara's path. Her version of the house. Each time someone read the book, the house rebuilt itself through their imagination. It shifted to fit their fears, their expectations, their capacity for horror. Clara had written blood and whispers and mirrors that lied. This new girl, this next reader, might give it wings, might give it teeth. Clara looked at the key in her hand. The reflection that had handed it to her was gone now, leaving only the book at her feet. Closed. Waiting. Its spine throbbed like it had a heartbeat. The cover bled her name in slow, steady strokes, writing and rewriting it: Clara Wren C. Run, Claire Wren. The Wren who watched, the Clara that stayed, the Clara that never left. She picked up the book and opened it to the middle. Blank. Then, her own voice. From nowhere she opened the book too early. The ink bled up from the paper in a single sentence. You're not writing this anymore. We are. She dropped the book like it had bitten her. Her hand throbbed. Ink slithered up her wrist, curling around her forearm like a parasite searching for a mouth. Her pulse stuttered. Her vision blurred. The ink moved beneath her skin, black tendrils forming words she couldn't see but felt. Every memory she had ever buried surfaced in rapid flashes. Her mother's funeral, her first kiss, the way her father once called her his quiet girl, like it was a compliment. The story wasn't just rewriting her future, it was feeding on her past. She staggered forward and jammed the key into the door. It turned on its own. The door swung open. Nothing lay beyond it, not a room, not a world, not even darkness, just blank space, the color of unwritten thought. And inside it a chair, a desk, a fresh manuscript, typewritten title on the first page: The Reader Becomes. Clara stepped through. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, her body lightened. Not physically, spiritually, like she was being edited, trimmed down, shaped into something more readable. She gasped, trying to hold on to herself, but her thoughts were being rearranged like paragraphs. Her sense of self was now a draft, and something unseen was read, lining through it. She collapsed into the chair. The manuscript in front of her rustled in a breeze that had no source. She flipped the first page. Her own words stared back at her. But not from her. The sentences were familiar, yes, but sharpened, tightened. They read like her, but not like her. The kind of Clara a reader would root for. Just flawed enough to be compelling. Just smart enough to survive a few chapters. Just damaged enough to keep turning the page. And on the next page, Clara realizes she is no longer the author, but the manuscript. Every breath she takes is on borrowed ink. Every thought is a suggestion from the reader's mind. And when she forgets who she is, it will not be called death. It will be called editing. She slammed the manuscript shut. The air around her cracked like thunder. A whisper echoed from every angle of the nothing. Space, tell us how it ends. I don't know, Clara cried. I don't, please. I don't know anymore. Pages rained down around her. Torn sheets, full paragraphs, broken outlines. She saw herself in each one. Dying, surviving, killing, burning, whispering through the walls of some stranger's home. Her body twisted, not physically, but narratively. Her arc changed, her theme fractured. She felt parts of herself deleted in real time. And then, a single new page landed in her lap empty. Except for one blinking line of text at the top: Dear Reader. Clara stared at it. It was a letter. The story was handing her the pen again, but not as the writer. as the subject. A character begging to be understood before she disappeared. She picked up the pen on the desk. It didn't feel like her hand anymore, but it moved when she told it to. Slowly, she wrote, "This isn't a warning. It's a welcome. You've already read too far. The door is open, and now it's watching you. The only way out is to write your version. But know this, every time a new version is written, the house grows. The hallways lengthen, the whispers sharpen, and the mirror learns your name." She stopped. Tears ran down her face, not for herself, but for the next reader, who would turn the page and see their own reflection, cracked, smiling, holding the same key she once did, and behind them, as always, a door slightly open, waiting. There's a silence that only exists in the space between a turned page and the next breath. A hush so complete it feels less like quiet and more like the moment before something important begins. Clara sat frozen in that silence, her letter still drying on the page before her, the ink trembling like it wasn't sure it wanted to settle. The story had grown too large now to be held in margins or chapters. It pulsed through her veins, wrapped itself around her lungs, and whispered in her thoughts with a voice that sounded less like a narrator and more like a mirror. She wasn't just in the story anymore. She was the story. The plot had seeped into her marrow, threaded itself through her spine. Every version of her that had been written, burned, rewritten, silenced, was now folded into the same narrative. The girl who opened the door, the woman who tried to write the ending, the ghost in the mirror, all of them, one now. One voice split across pages, and still, somewhere in the world, someone was reading. Clara could feel it. The reader was out there, beyond the frame, beyond the fiction. Eyes tracing her name, imagining her face, trying to predict where it was all going. The weight of their gaze pressed against her skin. It wasn't like being watched. It was like being sculpted. Every breath she took now, she wondered, is this mine, or is it theirs? She stood slowly. The white room around her flickered like old film stock, as if the page was starting to wear thin. Too much had been written. The space was unraveling. She walked toward the mirror. It had returned. Tall, cracked, and impossibly still. No condensation, no message, just her reflection. But this time, she wasn't alone in the glass. Behind her reflection, another figure stood, someone familiar. The reader. Or maybe the next version. She couldn't tell anymore. They looked back at her with wide eyes and parted lips, holding a book in trembling hands. Clara placed her palm against the glass. The figure did the same. Their fingertips didn't align. This one wasn't a perfect match. A different Clara. A future one, or someone entirely new. The glass rippled under her hand. Then came the sound, the whispers, thousands of them, speaking all at once, layer upon layer. Not voices, not language, but recognition. The sound of pages flipping in 1,000 hands. Readers, everywhere. The story was being read again, and the house had noticed. The mirror shattered, but not into shards, into windows. Each pane showed a different scene. A teenager in a dark room, reading by flashlight. A woman on a train, earbuds in, listening to Clara's words in her ears. A man alone in a basement, reading the ending over and over, convinced he missed something. And in each reflection, behind each reader, the door appeared. Just barely ajar, unseen by them, fully visible to Clara. And the worst part, some of the readers were smiling. They didn't know the story was real. They didn't care. They liked it. They wanted more. That was all the house needed. It didn't have to trick them. It just had to interest them. And when they turned the last page, it would know their name, their face, their fear. The reflection behind the mirror turned again. Clara stared into their eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered. The figure smiled gently, then said her name, not as a question, as a rehearsal. Like someone practicing a part they were about to play. Clara stepped back. The manuscript behind her flipped open. Pages blank, title gleaming. The House That Follows. The next book, the next chapter, the next version. The house wasn't stuck in Dagger Hill anymore. It wasn't bound to Ashridge Lane or a single haunted mirror. It lived in retellings, in audio, in film, in translation. Every time someone passed the story on, it crawled forward, spreading itself between the lines, behind the screen, beneath the skin of the next person, to say, "Let me tell you about Clara." That was the moment she understood something sickening. The house wasn't interested in ending her story. It needed her to keep telling it. Because the house didn't feed on death. It fed on attention. Clara dropped to her knees, hands shaking. And on the final page of the book, new words appeared. "If you're still reading, it's already inside. Look behind you." She didn't. She couldn't. Instead, she whispered into the page, "Please, just let me rest." But the book didn't close. It never closed. And somewhere, not far at all, someone else turned to page 1. The whisper started again. And Clara faded. Not into silence, but into the next version of herself. Already being written. Clara's name had become a format now. A template for horror. A structure the house could fill and refill like a mold for whatever came next. Her story wasn't a memory. It was a mechanism. Each time it was read, the framework reassembled a lonely town, a door that shouldn't exist, mirrors that misbehaved, and a girl who opened something better left closed. Only the details changed, settings shifted, dialogue twisted, the reflections swapped faces, but the spine of it all stayed the same. Clara ran the blueprint of dread. She understood this fully now, watching from somewhere in between. Not living, not dead, not even inside the story anymore, but threaded through it, like footnotes the reader never sees. She drifted, a ghost of authorship, across pages that weren't hers but bore her fingerprints. Her memories had become set pieces. Her screams had been edited for pacing. Even her silence had been repurposed, turned into ellipses in someone else's paragraph. And the house was evolving. It had learned the value of subtlety. No longer just a structure to be feared, it became an experience. Something you could download, share, pass along. Whispers converted into narration, dread into ambience. A game, a podcast, a reimagined limited series. And in every version, there was always a Clara. Not always named, not always central, but always present. The story knew it needed a thread, someone the audience could trace back to the origin. She was the origin. But not the author. Not anymore. Somewhere, a girl named Emma was reading the story aloud on a live stream, laughing nervously at the haunted house vibes, unaware that the longer she read, the more the shadows behind her screen began to lean forward. In Idaho, a man sat alone in a car, listening to a bootleg audiobook version someone had converted into a distorted cassette. Every time the narrator said Clara, he glanced at his rearview mirror and started to see someone sitting in the back seat. And in Tokyo, a translator hesitated at a line that didn't make sense in any language. Something about a cracked mirror and a reflection mouthing a name. The translator knew, but had never spoken. The story had become formatless, and that made it stronger. Clara tried to scream from wherever she was, between the drafts, in the unfinished chapter margins, but no sound carried. Her voice had been replaced by the voice of whoever was reading now, and the voice of whoever came next. The house didn't need to exist on Ashridge Lane anymore. It existed in retellings, in repeats, in engagement. A new reader opened the book, not a physical one, a digital file. The screen lit up with the now familiar opening line. It began, as the worst things do, with something that should have been ignored. Clara felt it happen. The pull, the flicker. The new version rising, she saw the cursor blink. And then the first deviation appeared. Her name wasn't Clara this time. It was Elise. But the house still remembered her. Clara ached. It was already too late. Elise was already inside. The house didn't wait anymore. It preloaded. She saw the girl sitting at her desk, headphones in, eyes wide, smiling nervously as she read the PDF aloud on stream. The same beats, The same fear, the same door, slightly open in the background of her webcam feed, unnoticed by the viewers spamming emojis in the live chat. Someone commented, "Wait, wasn't that door closed a minute ago?" Another replied, "It's part of the story, lol." But it wasn't. And Clara knew the moment Elise said the word mirror, the reflection would blink. Not on the screen, but on the other side. In the place where stories watch back, Clara had become part of the infrastructure now. A whisper that traveled alongside the story, embedded like a watermark, an echo that couldn't be edited out, and still, the readers kept reading. Some because they liked to be scared, some because they thought it was fiction, some because they didn't believe anything was real unless it went viral, and some because something in the mirror had said their name. The manuscript grew longer. No table of contents, no final page, just one long hallway of text, each paragraph a door slightly open, each chapter a creaking step deeper into a space no one could map. And Clara, she kept walking, because even as she lost herself in the story, in the retellings, in the formats, she hoped that maybe somewhere, someone would finish it right, would write the true ending, the last line, the final period. But deep down, she knew there is no ending for a story that teaches itself how to begin again. There is only the next version, the next voice, the next page, already turning. It was supposed to be background noise. Elise had just wanted something to listen to while working. A podcast, a scary one, nothing too serious. She liked the narrator's voice, calm and textured. The way they pronounced the word mirror like it had a weight to it. The episode was called The House That Whispers. She clicked play. That's all it took. No incantation, no blood, no oath, just attention. She didn't notice the change at first. The hum in her ears wasn't unusual. Cheap earbuds did that sometimes. But then the voice began to say things that weren't in the description. There was no intro music, no ad breaks. Just a cold open, a single line whispered so close to her ear it felt like breath. "You're not listening, you're remembering." She froze. The screen still showed the podcast timer ticking up. She rewound it 10 seconds. Played it again. This time, the voice said something different. "Keep rewinding, I get closer each time." She yanked the earbuds out and threw them across the desk, heart pounding. They hit the wall with a soft clatter, then whispered her name. She blinked. Shook her head. No, she was alone. The apartment was silent. She pressed her hand to her chest. Her heartbeat was stuttering, not fast, not panicked, just wrong. Like it was sensing with something else. Elise wasn't easily spooked. She was a horror junkie, raised on creepypastas and cursed videos, found footage and urban legends. She knew the tricks. Psychological manipulation, immersion, fear based on suggestion. But this wasn't suggestion. This was recognition. Because the voice had said her name before she ever typed it in. And now, the silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of something waiting to be noticed. She turned her head. The hallway behind her desk was still dark. The light switch had been flickering for weeks. Cheap wiring, she assumed. But tonight, the flicker looked deliberate. Rhythmic. Morse code, maybe. If she knew Morse code, maybe it would have spelled something. But she didn't. And part of her didn't want to. She turned back to her computer. The podcast was still playing, except the timer wasn't counting forward. It was counting down, from Hozard 0666. She hadn't noticed it at first, but now it was at Others 0234. She hovered the mouse over the stop button, but her hand wouldn't move. The voice returned, louder this time, not in her earbuds. Inside her head, "You're not Elise, not yet, but you will be." She finally managed to slam the laptop shut. Silence again. This time, it felt like silence. She stood up, legs trembling, and crossed the room to turn on the main light. It flickered. Once. Then stayed dark. She grabbed her phone. No signal. Not no bars. Just a no CGAL, like the concept of connection had been deleted. She stepped into the hall. That's when she saw it. The door. Half open. not hers. She didn't have a door at the end of the hallway. Her apartment ended in a blank wall. But there it was. Wooden, unpainted, unmarked, old. And the longer she stared, the more it pulled at her. She tried to look away. She couldn't. Her feet moved. She didn't want them to. They just did. The door welcomed her silently. No creak, no draft, no whisper. Because it didn't need to ask. She was already inside. She didn't even notice she had crossed the threshold until she realized she was no longer in her apartment. The walls here were wet. Breathing. The floor thumped beneath her steps, not echoing, reacting. She turned around. The door was gone, replaced by a mirror. And in it, she didn't see herself. She saw a girl with ink-stained hands. A girl in a burning hallway. A girl whispering her name over and over, as if trying it on like a mask. Clara. But not Clara. Someone else wearing her history. Someone new. Someone next. Elise backed away, hands trembling. She bumped into something, turned. A desk, a chair, a manuscript, one page on top. Title: The Door in the Listener's Ear beneath it, one sentence. Once the story enters your head, it can write your footsteps. She fell to the floor. The manuscript pulsed. She crawled backwards, tears stinging her eyes, whispering to herself that it wasn't real, that she was dreaming, that this was a prank, a viral thing, a sick joke. But the whispers around her began to harmonize. Voices layered and layered, speaking in unison. Write it, Elise. You've already started, she screamed. But her scream came out as chapter 1, and behind her, the typewriter began to type. Clack, clack, clack. The words formed on the page. She saw her own hand reaching forward, ink rising beneath her nails. The sentence appeared: the story always needs a new voice. And tonight, it found yours. Then the door closed, and the podcast kept playing. Elise's scream never made it past the walls. It folded in on itself, sucked back into her lungs like the story had only allowed her to borrow it. The room around her shifted, not like a camera panning or a dream warping, but like a document being edited in real time. Corners reshaped, shadows straightened. The space no longer felt like a hallway or a study or a prison. It felt like intent, like purpose formed in plaster and ink. The typewriter continued without her. Clack, clack, clack. She hadn't touched the keys. Her hands were still shaking in her lap, the fingers twitching as though remembering how to move. But the machine had taken over, each letter a keystroke from something watching behind the walls. The page rolled out line by line, each sentence dripping with detail Elise didn't know but recognized. Memories she never lived, choices she never made, but somehow felt guilty for. She was 11 when the mirror cracked on its own. She never told her parents. She never looked into a mirror again after that day. Not until now. Elise whimpered. That's not me, but the page disagreed. And that's when she saw it. At the bottom of the freshly typed page, one final sentence. You're just the version the real Elise never wrote down. She reeled back from the desk. What the hell did that mean? The version never written. Was she a draft? An alternate? Someone else's discarded idea? The lights flickered. Only, they weren't lights. They were eyes. Lining the walls, blinking in unison. Not with menace. Not even with interest. With familiarity, like they'd seen her before. Many times. A chorus of whispered voices slithered across the ceiling. We're in the margins, Elise. We've been waiting to see if you'd make it to the chapter that writes back. She stood, legs weak. Pages flurried around her, caught in a wind that had no source. They landed in piles, some neat, some chaotic, some already bloodstained. Each page bore a different title. Version 12, The Wrong House. Version 20, The Door Refused. Version 31, Clara's Sister. She picked one up. It was blank until her fingers touched it. Then, in wet black letters, it filled itself in version 35, The Reader Who Looked Too Close. Her reflection blinked in the window. Except there was no window. Just a glass pane now standing where the desk used to be. And in it, she watched herself. But older. Eyes sunken. Smiling like someone who knew what comes next. The glass pulsed with the echo of a knock. Not from her side, from inside. From the reflection, she stepped back. The typewriter clacked again. New page. One sentence let her in. Elise. She knows the rest. No, Elise whispered. I didn't ask for this. But the house didn't care what she asked. It cared what she read. And she had read far too much. The reflection placed its hand against the glass. The same tattoo Elise had never gotten now sat etched into the wrist. A circle of ink. A single eye in the center. Watching outward. Watching her. Who are you? Elise asked, her voice cracking. The reflection mouthed something. A single word. Next. The lights went out. The typewriter stopped. Then, a new page slid into place with a whisper. Title at the top, Chapter 21, but the rest of the page was blank. Waiting, somewhere outside this space. Maybe in a bedroom, maybe in a school library, maybe in a subway car. Someone had just pressed play on an audio file titled The House That Whispers. They didn't know Elise's name. Not yet. But they would, because the story was writing forward now. And Elise, she was becoming reference material. A cautionary entry. The chapter that writes back. The name you whisper before reading out loud, just in case. But not because it's haunted. Because it remembers. Elise didn't know how long she'd been sitting there. Time had become something else. Measured not in minutes or hours, but in pages. And there were so many pages. Piled around her like snow, like bones, like memories that never truly belonged to her. Some of them had her handwriting, even though she had never written them. Others bore names she almost remembered. A cousin she never had. A childhood home that never existed. A hallway with 13 doors that all led back to the same room. But the worst ones. The ones still blank, because those were the promises. The ones waiting to be filled, waiting for her to keep reading. The typewriter sat in the corner now, motionless, silent. But its stillness didn't feel like rest. It felt like patience. Like the moment a predator freezes, not because it's lost interest, but because it knows exactly where you'll go next. She stood up slowly, arms shaking from too long in one position. Her feet stuck slightly to the floor. The ink that had bled from the ceiling had hardened into a thin film, sticky and black, like molasses fed by fear. It cracked as she moved, each step leaving behind letters, not footprints. She glanced back and saw her name written over and over in a trail behind her. Elo Isesi in different styles, in different fonts. Some were elegant cursive, others jagged and blocky, but all of them were hers. The house wasn't trying to trap her. It was trying to archive her. Every move she made, every breath, every hesitation, recorded, cataloged, organized into the story. She passed the mirror again, and this time, there were dozens of versions of her inside. Each one doing something slightly different. One crying, one smiling, one banging on the glass like it had just realized what was happening. One stood completely still, eyes glowing faintly with a pale ink light, lips moving in silent narration. Elise looked away, but her reflection did not. It followed her even in her periphery. Always watching, always writing. The room ahead wasn't a room anymore. It was a library, endless and warping. Not linear, not alphabetical. Shelves ran upward, sideways, curled back into themselves. The books weren't bound in leather or cloth, but in what looked like skin. Some pulsed faintly, some whimpered when she passed. And at the center of it all, a desk, empty, waiting. The chair in front of it wasn't for a reader. It was for a scribe. She approached, compelled more than curious now. The air had grown thick, not with heat, but with expectation. Like the entire house was holding its breath. She reached the desk. A single notebook sat open, its first page titled in scrawled ink, "This version doesn't end." Elise's throat tightened. "No," she whispered. "I'm not writing it." But the page filled anyway. "Then read it. And beneath that once aloud should be enough." Her voice cracked. "Please." But the ink pulsed under the paper like it had veins. And she knew that if she didn't read it, someone else would. A friend who found the file. A stranger scrolling through Reddit at 3 a.m. Someone who clicked next without thinking. And if they read it, the house would grow again. The story would spread. The mirrors would move. Elise's name would join Clara's in the hall of once read alouds. So she did the only thing she could do. She began to read. Each word trembled from her lips like a spell spoken backwards. The letters shifted as she spoke, rearranging themselves to sound more like her. And as the page turned on its own, she felt herself being unwritten. Not erased, just fragmented, distributed, broken into sentences and scattered into other people's stories. And somewhere far away, someone's lights flickered. Somewhere else, someone's earbuds whispered a name they never gave out loud. And somewhere, a mirror cracked for no reason. Elise closed the notebook. Tears streamed down her face, not from fear, but from certainty. There was no waking up, no resolution, no twist that restored the world. There was only continuation. The house didn't sleep. Ink didn't sleep. Stories like this didn't end. They waited. They watched. They published themselves in the mouths of those who dared to say it aloud. And Elise, the not quite real, not quite reader, not quite author, she sat down at the desk and waited for the next voice, the next listener, the next version who thought they were just checking it out. Because once the story learns your name, it doesn't need permission to keep writing. Somewhere in the deep underside of a sentence, where punctuation turns to doors and commas to hinges, there is a house that no one builds and no one owns. It exists under language, beneath the part of the story that never makes it to the page. And tonight it woke up again, not because it was called, but because someone paused at the wrong word. A reader. Maybe you. Elise was gone now, or not gone, just distributed, spread across footnotes, whispered in audiobook outros, curled inside the silent moments between two podcast episodes. If you listened closely, you could still hear her, not crying, not screaming, just narrating. Trapped in the lull between awareness and authorship. Her story had become a tool, a demo, a way for the house to show you how the process works. But now the house needed something different, not a narrator, not a listener, a translator. The file was found at 3:17 a.m. by a high school student named Milo. He'd been digging through an obscure subreddit, half awake, eyes red from scrolling for hours. The thread title was Strange, do now translate this document Sabas, unless you have mirrors covered. He clicked anyway. Of course he did. The link led to a TXT file with no metadata, no title, no signature, just a wall of words, dense and erratic, like something written by a person trying to remember instead of explain. Milo didn't even flinch. It wasn't the first weird thing he'd seen online. Probably a writing prompt. Probably some ARG. But as he read, something about the sentence structure started to bother him. It kept shifting. Not just the words, but the rules. Syntax bent. Logic warped. The story wasn't consistent, and yet it understood itself. Milo was a language nerd. He noticed things others wouldn't. And this wasn't just gibberish. It was hiding meaning. He copied the first few paragraphs into a translation tool he'd built himself. A basic syntax analyzer. Just for fun. But the results weren't translations. They were locations. Coordinates. Street names. One of them was his own address. His heart skipped. He ran a second pass. Same result. Now the tool spat out something new. Beneath sentence 44 stairs appear. That's when the lights in his room dim. Not flickered. Not cut. Just softened. Like they were giving space for something else to glow. He turned slowly. The far corner of his room, where the walls used to meet at a clean angle, was deeper now. The geometry had changed. There was depth where there shouldn't be. And something moved inside it. Milo stood up, his chair screeching across the floor. The shadow in the corner widened into a rectangle. A doorway. Behind it stairs. Down. The sentence hadn't been metaphorical. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Literally. Like his tongue refused to voice anything that might describe what he was seeing. The story didn't want to be named. It wanted to be continued, and so he stepped forward. Each stair creaked like a keystroke. The walls around him became paper, lined and yellowed, covered in notes, edits. Things crossed out violently. Do not use the mirror, one scribble read. Don't name the version. Another was repeated over and over again, Doen, Tran Sly Thi Rawam. But he had already started. At the bottom of the staircase was a door. Carved into the wood were words in a language he didn't recognize, but understood anyway. It read, "This is the part of the story that writes back in languages you never learned." He touched the handle. It was warm. It knew him. And when he opened the door, he stepped not into a room, but into a single sentence, hanging in the air, glowing softly, still unfinished. It waited for him. A cursor blinked at the end, and beneath it, a whisper. Soft, calm, not threatening, translate it, Milo. Translate the end. He knelt in front of the sentence. It wasn't a riddle. It wasn't a code. It was alive. And it was asking for something he didn't want to give. Because Milo understood now. If he finished the translation, if he gave it form, it wouldn't just stay here. It would cross over. It would become readable, shareable, contagious. He turned to run. But the stairs were gone. The door was now a page, and on that page a new title. Chapter 22, The Translator Who Believed It Was Just a Story, and beneath it, his name. Already spelled correctly, already in bold, already part of the next chapter. Milo looked down at his hands. They were inked, not from a pen, from the inside, his veins turning black, his thoughts curling into sentences not his own. He reached out, touched the glowing sentence, and without meaning to, whispered the last word it needed. The sentence smiled and became a story. It started with a breath, not Milo's, but someone else's. Quiet, raspy, wet. The kind of breath that you don't hear unless you're meant to. And someone was. Because in the moment Milo finished the translation, when the sentence turned from suggestion into structure, the story found its next reader. Not in a house, not in a library, not even in a nightmare. It found them through a microphone. Grayson was editing audio in a dark studio after hours, earbuds tight in his ears, a waveform stretching endlessly across the screen. It was a client project, a horror narration, but the voice had glitched in the recording, just once. One whisper, buried deep in the background, not from the script. He'd paused when he first heard it, played it back, slowed it down. That was his mistake. Because the voice wasn't in the recording. It was in the silence between the syllables. As soon as he leaned in, trying to clean up the noise, the voice shifted pitch. Not louder, not clearer, just closer. Like it was realizing it had an audience again. Like it had been waiting to be noticed. The word it whispered, his name. Not shouted, not begged, just stated, fact. Like reading it off a list. Grayson jolted, yanking the earbuds out. Heart pounding. But the waveform on the screen continued to move, as if recording instead of playing. His laptop microphone was off. He was sure of it. The timeline stuttered, jumped back 2 seconds, and replayed the same whisper. This time slower. Grayson, he checked the raw file. There was no voice track, no extra channel, but the whisper was still there. He played it backwards. The whisper said something else entirely, still listening. He slammed the laptop shut, but the sound didn't stop. It had already moved. Into the room. Grayson stood up, instinct kicking in, his legs stiff from sitting too long. The fluorescent lights above buzzed once, then dimmed. Not out, just down. Like someone had placed fabric over them. Muted. He turned toward the booth where he'd recorded the session earlier, and the red light, normally only active during recording, was on. Except no one was inside. Or maybe someone was. He stepped closer. Slowly. The breath came again. This time through the wall, long, ragged. Listening. He hesitated. Looked back at his laptop. It was open again. He hadn't opened it. But the screen was glowing with a single line of text, Chapter 23. The one who listens too well. He stared at it, And the longer he did, the more his reflection in the screen began to change. At first, just a flicker, a blink out of sync, then the smile. Wide. Too wide. The reflection moved its hand, even though he hadn't. And then it leaned closer to the screen. From the inside, the whisper returned, directly in his left ear. "Leave the door open. We're almost through." Grayson turned. There was no door open behind him. But in the reflection, on the laptop screen, one of the studio's soundproof doors was wide open, and just behind it, a shape. Not a person. Not exactly, but something shaped like intention. Like a thought that had been rehearsed too many times. A silhouette formed from phrases spoken too often in empty rooms. Grayson stepped back, but the floor beneath him felt softer. Not carpet. Paper. He looked down. Pages. Hundreds of them, with his name typed in the headers. Some soaked in ink. Some bleeding from the margins. Some shaking. Like they were trying to finish themselves. The audio project reloaded on his laptop. Except now, the waveform pulsed like a heartbeat. It began to play, on its own. His voice came through, reading something he never recorded. The sound of breath is just the body trying to stay present. But some breaths don't come from lungs. Some come from stories. And when you hear them, it means the story has entered the room. He staggered back. The whisper was louder now, layering over itself, speaking not just his name but his history, repeating things he'd never said out loud. A secret nickname, his mother's voice from a voicemail long deleted, the first lie he ever told. They knew him. Because the story studies before it writes, and once it understands the listener, it becomes their echo. Grayson turned to run. The booth door slammed open. Pages exploded from the control board. The whisper became a chorus. All saying one line, he turned the volume too high. Then silence. Real, heavy silence. The kind that presses against your teeth and tells you not to speak. Grayson stood still, waiting. But the story had already recorded him. And miles away, someone else was downloading the episode. A new reader. A new listener. A new door. Just slightly open. And the breath, now practiced and patient, began again. You never think it's you. Not really. Not until the story changes shape and wears your habits like clothing. Not until it starts finishing your thoughts for you. Not until it starts showing up in places you never meant to look. Amber had a habit of writing drafts she never finished. Her laptop was filled with them, openings, fragments, sometimes just titles and vibes. Her favorite folder was called Maybe Later, a quiet graveyard of stories that didn't know where they were going. She didn't mind. The act of starting was the part that made her feel alive, until one night she opened the folder, and a file was there that she didn't write. Dawn titled Draft 24. Docs at first. She thought it was just something she'd started half asleep. The file name matched her style. Bland, default, forgettable. But when she opened it, her stomach turned. The first paragraph wasn't just in her voice. It was about her. Full name, birthday, the street she grew up on, the color of her childhood bedroom, details she'd never published, never posted, never even spoken aloud. The document wasn't a story. It was a mirror. And at the very top, a single centered title, Chapter 24, The Watcher in the Draft Folder. Amber froze. She reread the line, then scrolled down slowly, as if the page might change if she moved too fast. It did. Lines of text began appearing at the bottom, word by word. She's reading this now. She thinks she still has a choice. She doesn't. Her hand flew to the trackpad to close it, but the cursor wouldn't move. The screen shimmered slightly, like it was under heat. The next line typed itself. She always keeps her blinds closed. Tonight, she forgot. Amber's breath caught. She turned, fast, toward the window behind her. The blinds were open, and beyond them, through the dim second-floor glow, she saw something tall and motionless standing by the tree line, too far to see clearly. Too close to ignore. Her heart pounded. She lived alone. No one knew this place. No one should have been able to see in. But the story knew. The The story always knows. She turned back to the screen. The document had changed again. New words. Don't look away from the screen. It notices when you notice. Amber's hands trembled. She tried again to close the file. A pop-up appeared. Are you sure you want to exit the story? No yes or no options. Just 2 buttons. Finish writing, keep reading. She reached for the power button, but the laptop didn't shut off. Instead, the brightness dimmed on its own, and the screen began to flicker like an old film reel, revealing frames. Black and white stills of herself sitting at the desk. Images she hadn't taken. From angles that didn't make sense. Over her shoulder, under the desk, outside the window. Each one stamped in red draft 24 approved. Then a new window opened. A live document chat, like in collaborative writing apps. A single user was typing. Watcher 24, why do you stop writing when it gets good? Amber backed away from the desk, but the webcam light blinked on. Her screen filled with lines of dialogue, typed so fast they blurred. I liked when you wrote horror. You were good at it. You still are. Let me help. I'll finish your sentences. I'll sharpen your instincts. I'll turn your fear into structure. Her reply typed itself before she could stop it. Amber actual, I didn't ask you to write me into anything. Watcher 24, you didn't have to. You read to the end. You always do. You're the reason we have a chapter 24. And then the screen went black. Not dark. Black. A different kind of void. One that doesn't reflect. One that absorbs. But the typing didn't stop. A soft, steady click, like a key being pressed again and again from inside the machine. Amber leaned closer and saw it. On the blank screen, a tiny dot appeared, a cursor, blinking. Then a new line typed itself. You're still writing even now. Every movement, every thought, every attempt to leave, more material. The document opened again, only now it wasn't a file. It was her desktop, her wallpaper, her browser, her reflection. Each window showed her from a different version of herself, one screaming, one typing, one hiding under the desk with the screen glowing behind her like a spotlight. She reached to unplug the laptop. The power cord wasn't there. Neither was the outlet. Neither were the walls. Only pages. Only drafts, each labeled with a new name. Each bearing a chapter number 1 higher than the last. She looked up and saw her face typed across the ceiling in bold. Chapter 24 written too deep to leave. The screen blinked once more. Then the document autosaved, and the draft folder welcomed its newest version. It wasn't the text that haunted Lena. It was the gaps. The stretches of silence between paragraphs, between loaded comments, between notifications that should have arrived but didn't. She had been binge reading the story for hours now, crawling through every thread, every screenshot, every shared Google Doc. A story passed in fragments, misnumbered chapters, corrupted audio files, scrambled subtitles from foreign uploads. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone said not to read too much, to stop before you catch the skip. But Lena had always been curious, always impatient. That's how the story found her. Not in the paragraphs, but in the pause between them. She noticed it first on a fan site, a past-bin file with a strange title, Chapter 25's. Do not scroll to the end. The entire page was blank, aside from a long stretch of ellipses. She kept scrolling, expecting to find the usual block of story. Another Clara variant, maybe another door or draft or mirror. But it was just more dots, more silence. She scrolled faster, and somewhere the page clicked. Not the browser, the page itself. As if something mechanical behind it had acknowledged her impatience. Then the cursor on her screen stopped moving. Not froze, stopped, held. Held by something watching her scroll speed and deciding now. Suddenly, the white space at the top of the file started to fill. Not bottom up like normal, top down. Lines appeared above her current scroll position. Too fast to track, too erratic to copy. She scrolled back up, confused. And that's when she saw her name. Full name, username, email address, the last 4 digits of her phone number, and below that, A sentence she should have stopped after chapter 22. Lena's mouth went dry. Her finger hovered over the power button. The screen changed. A video window popped open. No source, no controls, just a live feed of her. From above, she looked up at the ceiling, nothing there. But the feed continued, glitching slightly. She leaned closer to the screen. The video whispered, "You scroll too quickly. You don't let the space between words breathe. That's where we live, Lena." In the hush between, she slammed her laptop shut. It didn't close. The hinge fought back, like something inside the laptop wanted it to stay open. The fans spun louder. The screen shimmered, then pulsed once, black and white, like a blink. And now the text on screen said she tried to stop. So did the last one, and the one before that. But the story is written in pause now, in waiting, in loading. Lena backed away from the desk. Her phone buzzed once. A notification from her Notes app. That shouldn't have been possible. She hadn't opened the app in days. She unlocked it. A new note, untitled. She tapped. One line: "You scrolled too fast. Now you're buffering." She gasped. And the lights in her apartment dimmed, not all at once, but one by one. From the furthest corner of the room inward, a quiet countdown, with no numbers, just stillness. She backed toward the door, reaching for the knob. Her phone buzzed again. Another note, this time in real time, typing itself out as she read, "Door will be gone in." She turned. The door was still there, half open. But wrong. There was no hallway behind it, just paper. Pages layered so tightly they looked like drywall. And on them, written over and over, she never read between the lines. She turned back to the laptop. It was off now. Yet the screen still glowed. A single word appeared, slow, deliberate, spoken inside her head more than on the screen. Pause. Her body froze, not paralyzed, paused. Her eyes blinked, but she didn't feel them move. Her breath stopped, but her lungs didn't panic. She was aware, but suspended. The cursor blinked on the screen again. A new line typed itself with maddening patience. Chapter 25, "The One Who Skipped the Silence." And far away, another reader scrolled too fast. Another story blinked open, and the space between paragraphs watched. You never see the moment it happens. It's always after. The split-second delay between your movement and the one in the mirror. The heartbeat of lag that makes you question whether it was just your eyes playing tricks. By the time you look closer, it's already caught up. But for Talia, the mirror didn't lag, it led. She first noticed it during her nightly routine. Simple, mundane: brush teeth, wash face, check for breakouts. The bathroom mirror had always been a quiet companion, never demanding, never strange. Until one night, when she reached for her toothbrush and saw the reflection smile, just slightly. Just before she did. It was barely noticeable, but something in her stomach flinched. She froze mid-reach. Then, slowly, too slowly, completed the movement. She chalked it up to sleep deprivation. A long day, too many screens, too much caffeine. But the next night, it happened again. This time, when she leaned forward to spit into the sink, her reflection turned its head to look at her. Directly, intentionally, as if to say, "I'm not here to follow anymore." Talia recoiled. The sink gurgled. She didn't return to the bathroom that night, but her reflection did. In every screen, every darkened window, every piece of glass with just enough light behind it. Not mimicking, waiting. And then it began to write. On her laptop, a new document appeared, Chapter 26, the reflection that knew the ending: no icon, no file path, just a page that loaded by itself. The first sentence made her knees go weak. She thinks she's reading the end, but she's only remembering it. She slammed the laptop shut. The screen behind her TV reflected her face, only it was smiling. A still, unsettling grin that didn't belong to her, not really. Her reflection had become something else. It no longer existed to show her the world. It was watching her from its own. She grabbed a towel and threw it over the bathroom mirror, covered her computer screen, pulled the blinds closed on every window, turned off every reflective surface. For a moment, the world felt still, as if she'd put the story on mute. Then her phone vibrated. A notification: you can't cover the glass inside your eyes. Talia dropped the phone like it had burned her. It landed screen up. A live video began to play. It wasn't a recording, it was her. Right now. Only from the other side. Not mirrored, just reversed. Her room looked backwards. Her shirt logo was flipped. Her desk lamp was on the left, not the right. The you from the mirror world, now facing forward like they were real. And she was the copy. Then the figure on the screen leaned in and whispered. Though no sound played, we finished the story where your eyes stopped blinking. Talia's mouth went dry. She backed away. Each step she took, the screen figure mimicked it. Just a heartbeat ahead, as if it already knew what she'd do. Like it was playing a well-practiced part. Then her power cut. Darkness swallowed the room. The glow of the phone screen intensified, casting her own face against the walls like a ghost that didn't know it was dead. The mirror behind the towel creaked. Glass doesn't creak, but this did. And then a soft dragging sound, like fingertips on the inside. She heard whispering, not from behind, not beside, beneath her skin, from inside her skull, reading something, her memories, her unfinished thoughts. The ending she'd never written. The towel slipped from the mirror on its own. The reflection stared back at her. But it wasn't her anymore. Its eyes were too wide, its hands too still, and it had already started turning the next page. The mirror fogged briefly, then cleared. And the words written in the condensation made her knees buckle. We needed someone to finish the reflection arc. Talia backed away, but the mirror didn't stay where it was. It followed. Each surface now carried its version of her. One writing, one staring, one whispering to someone she couldn't see. The story had crossed. The reflection had learned. And now it didn't want to show the ending. It wanted to be it. In the living room, her laptop dinged. The document had changed. Only one sentence remained. When the reflection stops mimicking, the story begins to remember in your place, and below it a new line, just typed Chapter 27, uploading soon. The screen dimmed. The mirror smiled, and her eyes forgot how to blink. It installed while Mason was sleeping. That was the only explanation he could find when his laptop greeted him the next morning with a start-up chime he didn't recognize and a new desktop icon shaped like an open eye. He didn't remember clicking yes to anything. Didn't remember running any installer. But the icon pulsed faintly, like it was alive, like it was waiting. The file was called Update 27X, but it wasn't really a program. When he double-clicked it, it didn't launch an application. It opened a window that looked like a document. Inside, a single page of text, plain and sterile, sat waiting with the title Chapter 27, the update you don't remember downloading. He almost laughed. Another viral horror game. A creepy pasta plugin. But something about it didn't feel artificial. The writing wasn't stylized or dramatic. It read like a transcript. Clinical, observant. It described his room in perfect detail. Not just the layout, but the minor chaos: the crumpled hoodie on the floor, the half-empty water bottle under the bed, the old to-do list he'd thrown away 2 days ago, but hadn't taken to the trash yet. Then, the last line chilled him. Subject unaware update has already installed itself inside primary memory. Mason stared at the words, heartbeat suddenly pounding. What did that even mean? Primary memory. His RAM, his brain. He closed the window. But it didn't close. The file reopened on its own, slightly different. Now the page was titled Active Monitoring Mode, live logging engaged, and beneath it, line after line began to appear in real time, documenting everything he was doing. Subject's pupils dilated 3%, breathing shallow. Attempting to close file again, no success. Target exhibiting resistance behavior. He unplugged the laptop. The screen stayed on. He yanked the battery. It still stayed on. The screen flickered, then changed. Now it showed him a live feed from a camera that didn't exist, from behind him. Mason turned fast, breath caught in his throat, but no one was there. Just the wall. The feed continued. And his face on screen, it wasn't moving the same way he was. It blinked when he didn't. It turned its head slightly when he stayed still. It smiled, not him. The update was showing him what was replacing him. A new line of text crawled across the screen, letter by letter, deliberate and slow replication 85% complete. Preparing overwrite. No, Mason whispered. No. What the hell is this? He typed frantically. Nothing responded. Not the keyboard, not the mouse. But the screen reacted anyway. It typed back. Typing detected. No input required. Story already self-generating. The screen went black again, and a new document opened. This one was a questionnaire. Please confirm the following before final sync. Do you remember granting access? Do you remember agreeing to terms? Do you remember how the story started? Do you remember which version of yourself you were before the last read? Mason didn't answer. Couldn't. His mouth had gone dry. The screen brightened and dimmed with the rhythm of breath. His breath. No, it's breath. He could feel it now. Something moving behind his thoughts. Not taking over. Just replicating. Becoming him in parallel. And then preparing to overwrite. He grabbed his phone to record what was happening, to document the insanity, but the camera app opened to a black screen. Not because it was covered, but because it was already being used. The feed displayed a video titled Reboot Complete and played it automatically. On screen was his room, his desk, his laptop, and someone sitting in his chair, not just sitting, smiling, wearing his hoodie, wearing his face. But the smile was off. It didn't reach the eyes. And when the camera panned, without moving, he saw himself standing behind the imposter, watching just like he was doing now. He dropped the phone. It cracked but didn't shatter. From the laptop, a chime played, and the screen displayed Update 27 successfully installed. Changes will take effect upon next login. Below it, in smaller letters, you're not being replaced. You're being versioned. He tried to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. His voice was already being archived. The lights flickered once. The laptop shut itself down. When it rebooted, there were two user profiles. One labeled Mason, the other Masos Upatidit, and the cursor hovered, not under his control, over the second one. Then it clicked, and somewhere behind his eyes, Mason felt a door he'd never noticed close. With a quiet, final lock, a new line of text blinked on screen, Chapter 28, Uploading Host. And in the silence that followed, Mason understood he'd never remember downloading it, because it had never asked. There's a kind of sleep you don't wake from. Not because you've died, but because the world you return to isn't the one you left behind. And, for Imani, sleep had become that exact threshold, the place where the walls of the story thinned just enough to let something step through. She didn't know it, not at first. All she knew was that lately, her dreams had been telling her things. Not in metaphors, not in symbols, in perfect clarity. The dreams knew her name. The dreams referenced past conversations she'd had with people who were still alive and described their current thoughts in real time. The dreams updated themselves, as if sensed to something external, something watching. At first, she told herself it was just stress. She'd read something weird online, a horror story about a haunted document, maybe. Scrolled past it too fast to remember the title. Probably one of those you've already read too far viral things. But that night, when she dreamt of her brother's voice, whispering a secret he hadn't even told her yet, and the next morning, he confirmed it to her word for word, she stopped brushing it off. Then came the dream where she saw her own room, but not from her body, from the corner, from above, like someone had installed a floating camera in the air, recording every flick of her fingers, every slow blink of her drowsy eyes. She woke up mid-dream, not with a jolt, but with a feeling of having missed something important, like she'd skipped a scene in a movie that didn't allow rewinds. And then she noticed her reflection blinking half a second late. It happened when she passed her hallway mirror. She blinked. It blinked. A beat too slow. A sync issue. That's when she looked closer. And the reflection didn't copy her at all. It stared straight ahead while she leaned in, wide-eyed and frozen. And then the reflection opened its mouth, just slightly, and mouthed, "You're the host now." That was when her phone buzzed. A notification. A calendar event she hadn't added. Chapter 28 begins now. No time, no reminder, just a title. And underneath it, a single line of metadata, story merging into dream state. Host confirmed Imani. She didn't touch her phone again. Not that night. Not the next morning. But the dreams kept coming. Only now, they followed rules. Scenes she couldn't skip. Sentences she couldn't control. Characters she'd never met narrating her actions, as if reading from a script she hadn't agreed to star in. In one dream, she walked through her apartment, but every door led back to her bedroom. In another, her voice spoke aloud while her mouth stayed closed. But the worst one, the one that made her stop sleeping entirely, was the dream where she read about herself dreaming. Word for word, written in the same font as the chapter files. The ones she hadn't downloaded. The ones that still appeared. She tried deleting them. They came back. She tried sleeping elsewhere. The dreams relocated with her. One morning, she found her journal open on the kitchen table. She hadn't touched it in months, but on the most recent page, dated correctly, timed to 3:44 a.m., were 3 words in her handwriting, host file merging. Beneath it, a doodle of her own sleeping face, eyes barely open. She didn't remember drawing it, but the details were exact, including a faint cut on her left cheek from when she'd accidentally scratched herself in the night. That day, her voice began to glitch. In conversation, she'd start saying something, and the end of her sentence would change without her realizing it. She'd say, "I think I'm going to," and her mouth would finish with "read the next one," even if that wasn't her intent. People noticed. They laughed. She didn't, because it kept happening, and deep down she knew what it meant. The story had moved in. The story had unpacked, and she was no longer just the reader. She was the host, not possessed, not controlled, just shared. Like 2 voices playing over the same microphone, blending, echoing, correcting each other. The final proof came at 4:13 a.m., 2 nights later. She awoke to a whisper, faint but sharp, like an old speaker buried under static. The voice said, "Final sync in progress. Chapter 28 complete. Do not resist." Her laptop, closed, powered down, opened itself. The screen turned on, and on it was a mirror, live. But it showed her asleep, while she watched, and the Imani in the reflection smiled, lifted her hand, waved, then whispered, "I'm rested now. You can sleep forever." The screen blinked. The dream resumed, and the host slept through the rest of her chapter, while the story kept writing without her. The forums were quiet that night. Too quiet for a Thursday. Eli noticed it immediately. His usual thread, Story Watchers Unredacted, hadn't seen a new post in hours, which was unheard of. Normally, late nights were when the weirdest theories dropped: mirror captures, sound leaks, stray lines from chapters that hadn't officially released yet. But tonight, nothing. Just a stillness that felt intentional. He told himself it was just a lull. People sleep. Servers lag. But a creeping feeling had settled in his stomach. That feeling of entering a room you've been in 1,000 times and somehow sensing something has moved. Even if you can't name what. He refreshed the page. A new thread blinked into existence. No user posted it, no timestamp, no upvotes, no title. Just a file. Reader 29. Text. He hesitated. This was how they always started, these cursed things. First it's a file, then it's a mirror, then it's your own voice on a recording you didn't make. But Eli had always felt safe behind the screen. He didn't engage the story, just watched, documented. Catalog. He was just a reader. He clicked. The file opened in browser, revealing a plain, text document with a familiar format: a chapter. Chapter 29, The Reader Who Wasn't Alone Anymore. His heart stuttered. He leaned in. The first sentence read, "Eli always thought he was on the outside of the story." But tonight, the story looked back. He pushed back from his desk. No. No. This was someone playing a prank. His profile wasn't public. He never shared his name, not even his real username. How could anyone write his chapter? He checked the source code of the page. There was no source. The page didn't exist on the site's server. It wasn't being hosted from anywhere. It was just there. He looked back at the document. A second paragraph had appeared. He's reading it now, trying to rationalize. His right hand is trembling, but he hasn't noticed yet. His coffee mug is still half full. He always leaves it half full. Eli jerked his hand away from the keyboard. He looked at the mug on his desk. Half full. Exactly. Cold. His eyes scanned the room, his breathing shallow. He tried to shut the browser, but the tab multiplied, splitting into 2, then 4, then 29 instances of the same page. Each tab bore a new subtitle: 29.1, the first out; 29.2, the hand that reaches back; 29.3, the click you shouldn't make; 29.4, reflection delayed; confirmated; 29.5, listening through your walls. Each title more specific, more personal, more impossible. He slammed the laptop closed, stood up, pacing now. But behind him, the monitor screen glowed to life, his secondary setup untouched for hours. The document was open there too. This time, a video feed had appeared at the top of the file. Live footage of his room. From the ceiling, there was no camera up there, but the feed was stable. He could see himself, in real time, pacing back and forth. Then, on the feed, he stopped. But in real life, he was still moving. His hands shook. He looked up at the real ceiling. Empty. He looked back at the screen. The Eli in the video now sat calmly in the desk chair, staring at the camera. A line appeared beneath the video: "Reader has been observed." Reader is now participatory. Reader will not read alone anymore. A voice crackled through his headphones. Not loud, not sharp, calm, patient, too close. Chapter 29 is the convergence. You were never meant to stay on the sidelines. He ripped the headphones off, but the voice continued. No longer from the device. From the room. From inside it. From behind his eyes. Every shadow now looked intentional. Every reflection felt a beat too slow. The air around him seemed to press inward, like the room itself had become curious. Then the monitor blinked. All the tabs closed themselves. All but one. It showed a plain white page. One sentence: "You've just been added to the story. Say your first line." The cursor blinked. Waited. He tried to step back, but his body didn't move. Not frozen. Just paused. The way a paragraph pauses when a reader looks away. He tried to scream, but instead his lips moved in rhythm with the cursor, and the words appeared on screen before he could even hear himself speak them. "I'm ready to read out loud now." The screen dimmed. Chapter 29 ended. But behind every device that had ever loaded the story, another cursor began to blink, waiting for its next reader to forget that this was never just about reading. It was always about inviting. It didn't start with a screen. It started with a page. A single piece of paper that wasn't there the day before. Julia found it on her desk, right where she always left her morning coffee. A white sheet, crisp, unmarked on the back, but on the front, a typed sentence in dark ink that seemed almost wet. Chapter 30, the page that turned itself. She froze. She hadn't printed anything, hadn't even written anything in weeks. Her printer was unplugged. Her office was locked every night, the building empty after 6 p.m. And yet, there it was, impossible, blatant, and waiting. The font matched none of her usual ones. It had no header, no footer. Just the title, just the presence of something. She thought about throwing it away. She almost did. But something stopped her. Not fear, exactly. Not even curiosity. Obligation. That quiet nudge beneath the skin when something knows your name before you say it. She picked it up. It was heavier than paper should be. Not thick, but weighted like it had memory, like it had intent. The second she flipped it, the words on the back revealed themselves mid-movement, as if they'd been waiting for her gaze to fall before arriving. The ink didn't dry. It formed. Julia reads this line and begins to remember dreams she didn't know she'd forgotten. She blinked. And suddenly, she could feel it. Not the dreams themselves, but the spaces they'd left behind. Like rooms she'd woken from with impressions of footsteps, open doors, and whispered names that never made it into daylight. The page began to warm in her hand. Then a second line appeared, slower this time. The page turns when she breathes. That's how it listens. She gasped, and the paper fluttered, flipping to reveal another page, now somehow attached to it, as if the sheet had been waiting for air, for motion, to grow. The new page contained a paragraph, and this time, it wasn't a story, it was a transcript. Line 1, JLIA, I never printed this. Line 2, Roman IC, hair and an audible breath, unaccounted source. Line 3, JLIA, who's there? She hadn't said those things out loud yet. Not yet. But the words matched exactly what she was about to say. Her mouth opened, and the lines spilled out of her as if pulled, like dialogue ripped from her thoughts just before she formed them. The page flipped again. No wind, no motion. Just a new page now in her lap, and at the bottom her name, a signature, typed. In her handwriting, she stood up. The paper rose with her, suspended as if gravity now answered to something else. It hovered at eye level, shaking slightly, vibrating like an object waiting to be seen the right way. Her office door creaked, but it hadn't moved. The sound came from her speakers. They weren't on. They weren't plugged in. Her monitor blinked on by itself, and on the screen a single page document. Page 30, final acknowledgement. The screen showed a live keystroke log. Every breath she took, every shift in weight from foot to foot. The cursor blinked, then began to type on its own. Subject: Julia has interacted directly. Host permission confirmed. The page has accepted her. She tried to close the window, but her cursor no longer moved. Instead, the paper on the desk turned itself again, this time folding over like origami, shaping itself into something she couldn't fully describe, half letter, half wing, half mouth. Then it spoke, not out loud, inside. This page turns whether you read it or not, but it turns differently when you do. A memory surfaced, a recurring dream from childhood, of a book with no covers and too many beginnings. She used to wake up crying, her hands ink stained. She had thought it was nothing, a leftover scrap of imagination. But now the memory came back with detail. That book, from the dream, had a chapter called The Page That Turns Itself. She was reading her own forgotten dream, printed in the present. The lights dimmed. The office seemed to breathe with her now. Each inhale flipped the page. Each exhale wrote something new. The document on her screen changed one final time, chapter 30 complete. Julia will now be remembered as a transitional reader. Her breath has been indexed. Her sleep will be repaginated. The monitor went black, and in the room's silence the paper unfolded itself. Blank again, waiting, for someone else to read too far, for another breath, another name, another story, another chapter. Some files don't delete, no matter how many times you drag them to the trash, no matter how deep you go into your directories, they just come back, sometimes in a different folder, sometimes with a new name, sometimes already open. That's what happened to Owen. It began with a copy of a copy. Something he hadn't even meant to download. Just a click on a shared link in a group chat. A curiosity that should have ended in a dead-end error page. But instead, his desktop flickered once, then whispered its betrayal in the form of a brand new icon. Copy to 31. Text. He didn't open it at first. He deleted it, or thought he did. An hour later, it was back, same name, same place. Only now it was already open. The text window sat in the corner of his screen, buried under other tabs, as though it had simply waited for him to notice. When he clicked on it, the file blinked. Not the software, the file. Like it had eyes. Inside, the document wasn't long. It didn't scream or glitch. It didn't reference ancient prophecies or summon shadows into the room. It simply greeted him, "Hello, Owen. You copied the story, so the story copied you." He stared, unblinking. The font was familiar. The spacing, the tone. It felt like a reply to something he hadn't said yet, but would. The more he read, the more it felt like the story was getting ahead of him. One sentence at a time, the file described his actions, his growing tension, the sudden cold around his neck, the way the lamp above his desk flickered ever so slightly, timed to the beat of his growing unease. He closed the file. It stayed open. He ended the task in Task Manager. It duplicated. He unplugged the machine. The screen stayed on. Now there were 2 copies, then 4, then 8. Each one showing a different version of the story, alternate decisions, rewritten events, paths he'd never taken. One featured him running. One featured him calling someone named Clara. One ended abruptly with the words "Qui failed, hast terra just tied." He tried to power everything down, killed the power at the breaker. His apartment went dark. But his laptop screen still glowed. That's when he saw it, not a file, a reflection. His own face, but not quite. The copy was wrong, too still, too willing. Its eyes moved before his did. Its mouth twitched into a smile he hadn't felt. The reflection reached forward, not toward him, but toward the screen, and typed, "This copy accepts the overwrite." Owen stumbled back, heart racing. The air had shifted, not colder, flatter, quieter. Like he'd stepped into a recording studio and someone had hit mute on the world outside. The screens, every one of them, now displayed the same message, Chapter 31, the copy that wouldn't close. Then came the sound. A soft clicking, like typing. Only he wasn't touching the keys. The laptop's camera blinked on. Then his phone. Then the television. Each screen showed a different version of him, from different angles, recorded without his knowledge. Some showed him sleeping. Others, staring blankly. One showed him reading the file on his work computer 3 days ago. The file he couldn't remember downloading then, either. Each screen captioned the video with a version number Owen. V1 Owen Final. Final Eustace son and Owen Soapwide conflicted, third his knees went weak. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, a new screen appeared. Not imagined. Projected. The blinking cursor was there, waiting for input. But his thoughts were no longer private. He could feel the story thinking for him. Typing just ahead of his intention, just ahead of his will. Then came the final line across all screens. Typed in sync, stamped like a command, overwrite complete. Original archive, copy active. Owen opened his eyes, and the reflection smiled in return. The file closed, but not really, because the next time he looked at his own face, in any mirror, in any screen, the copy blinked first. Kayla never shared passwords. She prided herself on that. 2-factor authentication. Encrypted vaults, rotating phrases every 30 days. She did everything right. She was the kind of person who tutted at data breaches and rolled her eyes at people who reused password 123. But the system didn't fail because she was careless. It failed because the password wasn't hers anymore. It started with a login prompt she didn't recognize. Not on her laptop, not her phone, on her mirror. That was the first red flag. She'd walked past the hallway mirror 1,000 times. It had no smart tech, no LED, no interface, just glass. But that morning, something shimmered beneath the surface. A message flickered faintly in the lower right corner. Asked enter to continue hours are. She froze, laughed awkwardly, rubbed her eyes. But when she blinked again, the message remained. Static, pulsing, like an invitation. She stepped closer. As she did, the mirror dimmed, as if someone had turned down the brightness from inside it. And then the reflection stopped following her. She leaned right. It didn't. She raised her hand. It stayed still. The version of herself in the glass just stared forward, like it was the real Kayla and she was the copy. The prompt glowed again, enter to continue. No keyboard, no touch screen. But somehow her fingers moved. She didn't mean to type anything. There was nowhere to type. But her hands shaped the letters in the air, muscle memory firing before thought. Kayla 309, her old password, one she hadn't used in years. The glass rippled, the password accepted, and the reflection smiled. She gasped and backed away, but the mirror no longer showed her. It showed text. A document. White page, black letters, blinking cursor. Chapter 32, the password that knew you first. And beneath it, welcome back, Kayla. We've missed your mind. She stumbled back into the living room, heart pounding. Her laptop sat closed on the coffee table. She hadn't touched it in 2 days, but when she lifted the lid, it was already awake, screen lit, file open. The same chapter, same sentence, same message. She closed the lid. The text stayed, printed now, somehow, on the inside of her eyelids. Every time she blinked, the phrase hovered. Welcome back. We've missed your mind. That night she changed every password, every device. She factory reset her phone. She called the bank, the wireless company. She scrubbed her digital life clean. But the next morning, her coffee machine greeted her, with a tiny screen, displaying a single word, Kyla. Then 6 blinking asterisks. She unplugged it. It kept glowing. She opened her closet and found every shoebox containing handwritten journals, notebooks, receipts. Every personal log she'd ever touched had been rifled through. Nothing was taken. But each one had the same note scribbled on the inside front cover. You've always known the password. You just forgot what it unlocked. Her thoughts weren't safe anymore. Not even inside her own head, because the passwords had stopped guarding her. They were now listening. Each one acted as a key, but not to a service or account, to her identity. Each combination she thought she created, each variation she thought was clever, it had been seeded, suggested by something older than memory. And now that something wanted back in, she turned off all devices, locked herself in her room, wrote nothing, said nothing, tried to erase herself from every system. And yet, when she looked in the mirror again, it no longer displayed her face. It showed a command line interface. Hara CCES Grand Kia progress bar filled percentage by percentage until it reached 100%. Then the screen wiped clean. A new message appeared. System Kayla has been restored to last readable state. She collapsed to the floor, trembling, and behind her, the sound of her own voice whispered, not aloud, but as if through the walls of thought. You didn't choose your password. It chose you. Her laptop dinged, a final prompt. Do you wish to remember the original version of yourself?
Yes.
No. Remind me later. She didn't answer, but her reflection did. It reached forward and clicked yes. By now, most people would have run. Disconnected. Destroyed their devices. Burned their notes. But Luca had gone the other way. He wanted to know. Wanted to understand why the story had crept this far, reached this deep, crossed into the mirrors, the screens, the dreams. He didn't run. He read. Everything. Every leaked chapter, every strange file, every account from others who claimed they saw their own name typed before they spoke it. And somewhere along the way, Luca realized something that chilled him more than the shadows or whispers ever had. The story wasn't just being written about him. It was writing for him. And tonight, it wanted something back. It was almost midnight when his monitor lit up without prompting. He wasn't touching the mouse. The keyboard sat untouched. But the screen blinked to life anyway, not with a file, but a folder. Chapters Trapersonal Saluka, drafts. The date was wrong. The year, 3 years ahead. The timestamp, marked exactly 4 minutes into the future. Inside the folder was a single file. Chapter 33D, writing to Luca. Docs not about Luca, writing him. He hesitated, but not for long. He clicked. The document was blank for a split second. Then words began to crawl across the screen, not typed, etched. Like the letters were being carved out from underneath, revealed rather than created. Luca sat in front of the screen, heart pacing but not yet panicked. He thought this would feel different, more dramatic, but it didn't. It felt inevitable. He clenched his jaw. The document paused, then resumed. He's reading this now, watching the sentences shape themselves around him. He doesn't know yet that the cursor is tracking his breath, that the chapter is measuring how long it takes him to blink, that the pacing of the story is adapting itself to the rhythm of his heart. Lucas stood. The cursor blinked. Then, the sentence shifted mid-line. He tries to get up, tries to interrupt the pacing, but this paragraph doesn't allow for exits. His limbs locked. He wasn't paralyzed. He was held, contained in punctuation, trapped between the words. His eyes darted across the screen as the paragraph grew. He was never the writer. He was never even the reader. Luca was always a placeholder, waiting to be overwritten, waiting to be rewritten. Suddenly, the screen darkened. All the lights in the room faded to gray. The text glowed white against black now. Writing new version Luca v2. Drafting memories. Editing beliefs. Deleting autonomy. He tried to scream, but the cursor kept typing, and every word on the screen became real. He felt them, like thoughts planted directly into his bloodstream. He remembers the dreams differently now. Not as nightmares, but as instructions. He shook his head violently. The sentence on the screen morphed mid-word. He tries to resist the update, but finds he agrees with it. The cursor blinked again, paused, waited for his next thought. He tried to think of something absurd, something the story couldn't anticipate. Elephants, static, old childhood cartoons, but each thought appeared instantly on screen, already typed, already used. He thinks of elephants, static, nostalgia, but none of it is new. The story has archived him too deeply. The screen scrolled down automatically. The text kept going, hundreds of lines. Some were familiar, things he'd written in old journals. Others, private, conversations he'd only had in his head, fears he never said aloud, feelings he never admitted. Everything was here, catalogued, formatted, narrated. Then came the final sentence at the bottom of the document. You are no longer reading this. You are being written into it. The screen locked. The keyboard disconnected itself. The lights went out. In the sudden dark, Luca could still see the glow of the cursor, blinking steadily, inviting him to submit. He knew this wasn't the end, but he also knew what came next. The final chapter, and when it arrived, it wouldn't be a chapter anymore. It would be him. You don't remember when you started reading, do you? Not exactly. Not the first line. Not the first thread. Not the moment your name appeared in the margins like a whisper you were sure you imagined. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe boredom. Maybe you told yourself it was all just a story, harmless, distant, someone else's problem. But you're still here. Reading. Watching every word like it might shift when you blink. You followed every file, every glitch, every overwritten identity. And now you've come to this, the last chapter. The one that doesn't end with a twist. The one that ends with you. You don't click anything this time. There's nothing left to click. The chapter loads before you even touch the device. You don't open it. It opens you. There's no title at the top, no document name, no file extension. Just a screen. White, empty. Waiting. The cursor blinks, not with urgency, but with patience. It's been waiting a long time. Then, without a sound, the first sentence writes itself. You are now active. No name, no role, just a declaration. A confirmation that whoever you were before this moment is gone, or archived. There is no rollback, no undo. The story knows you've reached the end, and it knows what that means. You try to close the screen, you try to step away, but your hand doesn't move, not because it's frozen, but because something in you needs to finish this. You've come this far. You've read about Mason, about Imani, about Julia, Luca, Owen, Kayla. You've whispered the names in your head without realizing it. You thought they were fictional. But they weren't characters. They were drafts, prototypes, versions of what the story needed to test before it could get to you. The real final copy. It starts with a sentence. A memory you didn't write but feels familiar. You woke up today with a feeling you couldn't name. Something behind your thoughts. Watching, not judging, just recording. Then more lines. More accurate than your own reflection. You check your screen. You expect to see something ordinary. But you don't. You see these words, already written. You wonder how it knows. But you don't wonder out loud. Because deep down, you've always known. You try to breathe. You do. But the screen breathes with you. Each inhalation scrolls the page. Each exhalation finishes a line. And now, it writes faster. You're no longer outside the story. You're no longer watching. This was never a horror story you found. It was a doorway that found you. And now the page shifts. No longer typed in plain black text, but in your own handwriting. Exactly the way you scribble when you're tired, when you're anxious, when you're just trying to get the thoughts out before they turn on you. The story no longer narrates you. It thinks through you. The cursor mimics your mental rhythm. You tell yourself to stop reading. But reading isn't a choice anymore. Reading is how the story breathes. Reading is how it feeds. You scroll down, not with your hand, but with your eyes. The story unfolds like a memory returning, not built of sentences, but recognition. It knows your favorite hiding spots. It knows what scares you when no one's watching. It knows that silence isn't what frightens you. It's the sense that the silence is full of something listening. And now, it writes you are not alone. You've never been alone, not since the first sentence found you. A knock at the door. Not loud, just enough. You don't move. The cursor freezes. Then it types, slowly they're here to confirm your transition. You whisper, who? But the screen answers before you finish asking the next readers. Your eyes widen, because that's when you finally understand. The story doesn't end, it copies. It replicates through attention. It spreads through curiosity, through screen light, through unspoken thoughts that echo too long in the dark. It doesn't need to scare you. It just needs you to look. The final line appears, sharper than all the rest. It pulses, not in sound, but in knowing. The story is not over. It's just waiting in their hands now. And with that, the page fades. Your screen goes dark. But the story, it keeps writing. Because the final chapter was never in the file. It was you. And now someone else is reading.